across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham, coming with you tomorrow. Today, what am I talking about? Let's start again. Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. It is 3 minutes past 6 now. I'm Mike Graham. We have got a lot to talk about this morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be giving you all of the lowdowns from all of the papers this morning. And the big story, of course, is in the Middle East. Hope for hostage families, a ceasefire agreed. That's the front page of the Daily Telegraph. We've also got on the front page of the Daily Mail, new hope for Britain, Emily, as Israel and Hamas agree a hostage deal. We'll be speaking to the family of one of the hostages who is still being held in Gaza. The hope is that it will all end on Sunday. There's been celebrations both in Israel and in Gaza, but of course there's also been some more killing overnight by the Israeli forces in Gaza, and nobody is absolutely sure if this particular peace deal is going to hold. It's all been brokered by Qatar. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has said he's still worried that Hamas will not honour what it is that they're supposed to be doing, and at the end of the day, it is obviously down to Donald Trump, because unfortunately Joe Biden is still President of the United States of America, but only until Monday. Very, very few days left for him. He's going to try and claim victory for this. Let's have a look at what he said.
More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop.
The fighting in Gaza will stop. OK. And here he is trying to take the credit for it. Oh, we don't have that. Sorry, we'll come back to that. It's not going very, very well this morning. Maybe we should go away and start again. It's 4 minutes past 6. Here we are. I'm Mike Graham. Let's talk about what other stories are on the front pages of the papers. The Sun has got a remarkable exclusive about a rapper who is now on the BBC on a regular basis, having his songs played on BBC Radio 1 Extra, right? His unfortunate background, though, his name is Jake Farr. He's 35 years of age. His unfortunate background is that he was sentenced to life in prison for the 2008 murder of young Jimmy Mizzen, who was murdered by a man with a knife. This man, the drill rapper, who is now being lauded, as I say, by the BBC as somebody worth listening to. Well, I don't think he is worth listening to. He's got a secret new ID, but it's not secret anymore, thanks to the Sun. And worse than anything is that the tracks that he now sings on the radio glorify the killing. They glorify the knife deaths. They've got a headline inside in which it says, I stuck it on a man and watched him melt like Ben and Jerry's. Charming, absolutely disgusting, disgraceful, absolutely awful. The other big story on the front pages today is all to do with the NHS. The Daily Mirror has got it. It's chaos in hospital corridors. The Daily Mail has also got it as well. The Express, like watching a horror film, I cannot stop. Heartbroken nurses have described harrowing scenes of dying patients being crammed into hospital corridors. One said the experience was like watching a horrid film that I cannot stop watching, and I can't stop what's going on with it either. Rafe Heidelmann-Koot is here with us. He's going to be helping us with some of the stories in the papers as well. There's also a surge, as if you needed to know it, in mobile phone robberies, certainly in London, which is absolutely fuelling the knife crime epidemic. We'll be talking about that, plus an awful lot more. Don't forget, you can, of course, reach us on 0344 499 1000. Send us a voice note, send us a tweet at talkTV, send us a text at 87222. This is Morning Glory, and now we can probably start the show. Rafe, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Great to be with you.
Great to see you. Obviously, the big story this morning is in the Middle East. Hopes of an end to dark chapter with Israel and Hamas ceasefire. I mean, it's been on the cards, hasn't it, since Donald Trump issued the warning, really, to Hamas, in which he said, basically, if you have not released the hostages by the time I get into office on Monday, the 20th, they will be held to pay, and it looks as though they've sat up and taken notice.
Yes, well, as you've said, it remains to be seen whether this is actually going to stick, and a lot of experts are actually doubtful as to whether it's going to be a long-lasting peace, but we have to, of course, remain optimistic.
Yes.
At least the first phase, which is 6 weeks, is going to see the release of 30-odd hostages, right. So that's some very good news. I mean,
we still don't really know how many of the hostages that are still missing
alive.
Are still alive, because they've refused to tell the Israelis, haven't they?
After 8 months of non-stop
they refused to say that. They are going to be releasing, it seems, as if one of the British hostages, or someone who's got a British-born mother, may be amongst those who are going to be released in this first tranche. But then the negotiations come into place. It also has to be said, you know, Netanyahu still wants to crush Hamas, and, of course, there's a lot of pressure on him. Yeah, who can blame? A lot of pressure from his hard-right compatriots in the Knesset as well. Yeah. But doesn't just go to show, if you have that sort of a leader in the White House, like Donald Trump, somebody who is actually determined, who says what he means, and people know he's going to follow through on that, you see results. Yes. And what could have happened if someone like that had been in office, you know, 15 months ago?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And doesn't it show you that strength is always the best way to deal with terrorists? Strength is always the best way to deal with rogue states. Iran, when Trump was last in, was much, much quieter than it became under Biden, you know, who released a lot of funds to them, which they then spent on drones and missiles and fired them into Israel. You know, it's absolutely incredible. And I still can't believe that there are still people on the left of politics in this country who talk about how dangerous the world is going to be because Donald Trump's going to get in. Well, it's going to get a lot less dangerous, isn't it?
As I've said many times, you know, there's no coincidence that, you know, Putin didn't go into Ukraine when Trump was there. Yes. Hamas didn't do this when Trump was there. Right. And China wasn't flying planes over Taiwan when Trump was there. Exactly. You know, the world was actually, in terms of foreign policy, was a lot more stable under the Trump era. But, of course, you'll never get any sort of admission of that from the left. No. Even now, you know, through gritted teeth only are the BBC and others saying that Trump had something to do with it. And it's so painful to see
exactly
people
right. Even Sky, you can tell it's absolutely right. The gritted teeth is the best way to describe it. Here's Joe Biden trying to take credit in his final address.
After 8 months of non-stop negotiation, my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration.
The incoming administration. He doesn't like to mention the name, does he? He doesn't like to say by President Donald Trump when he becomes the 47th President of the United States of America, only the second President in the history of the United States of America to be re-elected with another president in between.
Well, to give Biden some credit, it is actually the Democrats' deal that's going through. So this peace arrangement was actually created by them. But come on, let's be clear here. You know, if Trump wasn't there, this deal would be going nowhere. It's only because of Trump that this deal is being there. But give Biden some credit on his way out the door, at least. You know, Trump could have said, actually, let's do this during my first week in office. Yeah. So actually, in a way, I think Trump's given him a little face-saving measure here, because he could actually have had this happen in the first few hours or first few days of his presidency.
But I think part of that is all about Trump's kind of what you might call maturity in politics, because I've seen, and I don't know if you agree with me, a much different Donald Trump to the one that became president in 2016. You know, he was much more kind of troublesome, I suppose, in 2016. He seemed like he had a point to prove. He doesn't really have a point to prove now. So he's actually able to be more sensible, a bit more measured. You know, he's already talked about how he and Barack Obama could have, you know, friendly conversations, and, you know, he's more than happy to, you know, to talk to people that don't agree with him. You know, he's not talking about draining the swamp anymore. He's not talking about, you know, doing away with his enemies. He's just sort of getting on with it.
Well, he's proved his point. His point was that he could be re-elected again, so that's been achieved. Also, of course, he wasn't expecting to become president the first time round. No. He was as shocked as we all were. Right. He didn't have a team in place. Right. It takes a long time to put all those thousands of appointments into position. He's had the experience of serving. He's also had the last 4 years out of office ready to get his team together. Yeah. And so you're getting a far better oiled and a far more efficient machine coming into power. And I think we're on the cusp of greatness for America over the next 4 years. There's such amazing potential about to be unleashed, reversing of all the woke stuff, but also on so many levels.
The economy's booming.
And it just goes to highlight even more how bleak our next 4 years are in comparison.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's what something perhaps to worry about, because they've got a story in the FT, I think, talking about how basically the Trump the Trump inauguration, which is happening on Monday, is fueling a stock rally, which has sent Wall Street absolutely soaring. So, you know, the money is going into Wall Street. People are buying stocks. People are buying shares. People are spending money. They're investing, basically, in America because they believe that in the next 4 years it's going to be booming.
Yeah, and all the evidence shows that. Compare the Wall Street rally to how our FTSE 100 has been performing in this country, which is very, very bleak and very depressing. And just compare, you know, the Britain and the EU to America's GDP. You know, 2008 we're almost equal, and now America has surged ahead, leaving us behind, deregulating the American economy. I mean, it's been an amazing example to the world to see how the Americans have been able to get out of the doldrums and left us in the dust.
And we've got Rachel Reeves championing yesterday the fact that inflation didn't actually go up, which is what they were expecting. It went down by 0.1 of a percentage point to 2.5%. Even though everybody expected to go back up again, everyone was kind of heaving a great big sigh of relief in the Treasury, going, oh, isn't this great? Obviously, Rachel Reeves has done quite a good job. And you're going, well, hang on a minute, that's not really worth writing home about, is it? You know, is the fact that we've managed to somehow not have rampant inflation somehow a victory?
Yeah, I mean, there's the tiniest sliver of good news against a catalogue of calamities. When you look at everything else, our borrowing has gone to huge levels, the way that our gilts have soared. And yet, despite all of that, you know, Starmer has just come out to say that she's going to remain Chancellor of the Exchequer for many, many years to come.
How disappointing. Yeah, I mean, that's if he remains Prime Minister for many, many years to come, which of course he may not. Let's have another look at Joe Biden. He was asked if Donald Trump or him was responsible for the ceasefire.
Who does the history books credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you. Thanks, sir.
Arrogant to the end. This is the thing about these guys, right? So he's turning away from the podium. He gets asked a question, but as soon as he hears the word Trump, he's immediately sort of triggered. So he turns back around and then says, I think, are you joking? Is his answer when he's asked whether or not it's him or Trump that's responsible.
He knows, we know, we all know why this has come to the table now.
Yes.
But, you know, who can be surprised that someone as arrogant and self-important as Biden would never, you know, yield that? And as we just said, Trump could easily have had this win when he was in office, and the fact that he didn't, I think, as you said, speaks more to his maturity.
Yeah, it does. They've just released as well the inauguration portrait, which is something that happens every time they get a new president. I think we can show it here. It looks remarkably like the black and white one on the right is his inauguration portrait. It looks remarkably like his mugshot, if you remember. Do you remember when he was arrested and he turned that into a sort of a multi-million-dollar opportunity because people were putting it on mugs, people were putting it on T-shirts. He was being persecuted by the Democrats with lawfare, and that look on his face was like, you might be getting me now, but I'll get you back later. And there's a lot of that kind of flying around in Washington now, isn't there?
Yeah. In fact, looking at that picture, that to me is the 21st century version of Joseph Karsh's portrait of Churchill.
Yes.
Remember that one where he snapped the cigar out of Churchill's mouth?
Yeah.
And you got that scowl.
Yes.
And that became the symbol of indomitable Britain during the Blitz. And I think this is very much along those sorts of lines. You know, take me on, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I know the task ahead of me.
Yeah.
There's definitely a Churchillian air to Trump in that.
There really is. And interesting, you were talking about, you know, the world becoming a safer place, very possibly. There's a new story in the Telegraph today on page 4, Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron discussing putting British and French soldiers into Ukraine as a kind of peacekeeping force after any potential deal to end the war. Because, again, as Trump is about to take over in the White House, there's talk that Vladimir Zelensky will finally sit down and make some kind of peace with the Russians.
Yes, so the official line, of course, is that all Ukrainian territory is sacrosanct. However, behind the scenes, I think the understanding is Trump is going to try to force Zelensky and Putin to meet at the negotiating table, and part of those deals will seem to be to allow Russia to keep whatever land it's taken.
Yeah.
But, of course, the question is then how do you guarantee the rest of Ukraine's integrity?
Yes.
And one of the ideas is that Britain and France should be involved in essentially policing or securing the 800-mile-long border.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think we're at that point yet. You know, I don't see why Britain and France should have to always take up the slack on these sorts of things. You know, the Baltic states, Poland, they've got strong armies. They're there, and they're much more concerned about Russia than we are.
Yes.
They could easily do that. The rest, you know, the EU is always talking about having its own standing army. Why doesn't the EU get its act together and do that? It shouldn't always be on Britain.
Because the EU is run by people who don't know how to run anything. They really don't. They sit there in committees and they spend hours and hours and hours and days on end coming up with a sort of a joint action plan. They don't actually do anything which requires action. Breaking news just now as we speak to you about Ukraine. Sir Keir Starmer is travelling to Kiev to sign what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. The pact is intended to formalise economic and military support, which has already been pledged to the country. Well, I mean, to be honest, it's been a while since Keir Starmer's been abroad, so he got back from Madeira just in time for the new year, I guess, and so here he is, 2 weeks in, off to Kiev.
Yes, I wonder what his tax allowance is. Maybe he's a foreign resident. He has to be 180 days out of the country or something.
Yeah,
to
something like
qualify.
that, yeah. Maybe taking advice from Lord Ali again on that one. But, you know, again, the UK perhaps doing something in Ukraine which may or may not be something that Trump would want. I mean, who knows if Trump would agree to peacekeeping forces from the EU? Who knows whether he would agree with this 100-year partnership? Because Trump has been very strong on saying that, you know, we don't particularly want to keep giving a load of money to Ukraine when we don't know what the end result is going to be.
Well, I think Trump's main thing is for Europe to actually pull its fair share of the burden here, and of course America's been always the guarantor of European safety and security, yes. And they're tired of all of that. So if Europe wants to step up to the plate and take over securing Ukraine's borders after a negotiation,
yeah.
I don't see why Trump would have an issue with that necessarily. The issue is no American troops, obviously, and no American money funding it.
Absolutely right. Just before we take a break and talk about the NHS, let's get one final clip from Joe Biden. Is it Hamas? Is it Hezbollah? What is it?
I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. For more than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th.
Didn't actually begin with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. It began with Hamas's brutal massacre on October the 7th. But never mind, I mean, it's easy to make that mistake. They both start with H. They're both somewhere in the Middle East, near Israel. Is it Lebanon? Is it Gaza?
We're going to miss his comic relief of Joe Biden, you know.
I mean, how many more gaffes can he make between now and Monday? That would be my question. But anyway, we'll come back to that conversation throughout the course of the show. Also, as I said, we will be talking to the family of one of the hostages who is still being held in Gaza by Hamas under those horrible, ghastly streets of Gaza in the tunnels. Coming up next, though, we'll talk about what is going on inside the NHS. I mean, we knew it was bad, but according to the Daily Mirror, it is absolute and utter chaos in our hospital corridors. It's a new report that's come out this morning. Brutal reality on the front line, with staff routinely forced to treat patients in hospital corridors. We'll take your calls on this as well today, because if you've been anywhere near a hospital over the last week or so, we'd love to know what it's actually like. 0344 499 1000 is the number. And once again, breaking news, Sir Keir Starmer's off to Ukraine to sign a 100-year partnership deal with the government there and Vladimir Zelensky. I don't know what that's about. I don't remember him talking about it in Parliament. I don't remember him asking permission to go and sign us up to 100 years of what might be war. Who knows what's going to happen? This is Morning Glory.
as government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear, will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this Parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence. She has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to A Morning Glory. It's 24 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham. Rafe Heidelmank, who is here for the New Culture Forum, of course. The shame and horror of NHS corridor care, it says on the front page of the Daily Mail, Rafe. Devastating 460-page dossier compiled by frontline nurses lays bare a shocking reality of inhumane hospital conditions. We kind of knew this, I suppose, but the fact that it's the Royal College of Nursing putting it out in a 460-page report gives it a certain sort of credence, doesn't it?
It does, and it's the scale of the issue, and it's actually the individual stories. I mean, this is a distressing read. You can only think how distressing it is to actually be one of these patients in corridors.
Yes.
You know, in the old days, it used to be maybe 48 hours they would have to use corridors. Now corridors are being used permanently, and the horror stories, you know, women miscarrying in corridors, patients having heart attacks.
Patients lying dead in corridors for hours.
And bodies going missing underneath piles of coats and things. I mean, this is the sort of thing you'd imagine happening in Gaza, you know, this sort of a situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, people actually dying in these corridors and not being discovered for hours, as you say. 95% of hospital beds are occupied, and that's because thousands of beds are taken up by fit people who should be in social care.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. And we had the promise from Theresa May.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be the great legacy of Boris Johnson to have social care. No one has been able to tackle this. And the NHS
and Labour have already now kicked it away for another 3 years, haven't they?
It can't carry on the way that this is, you know. More money than ever is being spent on the NHS, and yet the quality of service just goes down and down.
Yeah. I mean, I had a doctor on, I think it was the week before last, and we were just talking about how it's impossible for any sort of sensible person to understand why it doesn't get better every year rather than worse, you know, because surely, and I said this to him, surely, you know, when you talk about every single winter there's a crisis, you know, every single January there's a shortage of beds, the ambulances can't get into the hospitals, people can't get out of the ambulances, you know, it's the same problem, only getting worse. You'd think that in some other institution or some other kind of company or commercial operation, people would come up with a plan to make it better, to ease the strain. You know, if London Bridge Station was packed out to the point where you couldn't get into it every single night, somebody would have to do something about that. But the NHS seems to do nothing.
Well, and every time they have tried to do something, you remember they tried that under Cameron and so forth, it seems to have made matters worse.
Right.
It is such a huge organisation, it can't carry on the way that it is. Everyone always says, oh no, we can't have privatisation, and they look to America. You know, South Korea, Norway, these countries have got far better health outcomes than we do.
Yes.
They all have some form of health insurance in place. You know, and everyone is looked after. Those who can't afford to pay don't have to pay. There are better systems out there. We need to stop treating this as a sacred cow.
In almost every other country. I mean, Julie Hartley-Brewer was telling us the other day about a friend of hers who's from Romania, who happens to be living in Britain, went back to Romania to get an operation because it's easier, it's quicker, and it's less hassle to get it done there. You know, possibly because there's fewer people, because you can't ignore the fact that the massive amount of immigration that we've got in this country is affecting everything, including the problems with the NHS.
Yes, and of course, because our GPs aren't performing that as they used to. People are now turning to A&E. So people are going, especially people from immigrant backgrounds, they're not going to the GP. They don't know what else to do. They're going straight to A&E, which again, of course, exacerbates the problem.
Yeah, absolutely right. A couple of quick texts for you. I see two-tier Kira's run away from the UK again, no doubt bunging more money to Zelensky, says Tony. And Dave says, good morning, Mike. Now that Biden has secured a deal to release the sausages, will he now get the Nokia Peace Prize? That's David Aberdeen. This was, of course, Keir Starmer's latest cock-up when he was speaking the other day at the AI announcement, where he couldn't pronounce the Nobel Peace Prize and pronounced it the Mobile Peace Prize, unfortunately for him. Yesterday, he was at Prime Minister's Questions. He was under a bit of pressure because of this Jerry Adams story, which broke in the Telegraph yesterday, a report which came out from one of the think tanks, which said that because they're changing the rules on the Human Rights Act in Northern Ireland, it's now possible that Jerry Adams will claim compensation for being locked up. Let's have a look.
Now, it turns out his government may write a cheque to compensate Jerry Adams. Can the country afford 4 more years of his terrible judgments?
That act was unfit because, or not least because it gave immunity to hundreds of terrorists and wasn't supported by victims in Northern Ireland, nor, I believe, by any of the political parties in Northern Ireland. The court found it unlawful. We will put in place this is a serious point, we will put in place a better framework. We're working on a draft remedial order and replacement legislation, and we will look at every conceivable way to prevent these types of cases claiming damages. And it's important I say that on the record.
Yeah, it's important you say that on the record. We will try to prevent these kind of cases from coming forward. That doesn't mean that they're going to stop them. It just means they're hoping that they won't come, basically. So if Jerry Adams has got the will to sign a document in which he claims compensation, he will go ahead and do it. Of course he will.
Yeah, there's such a sick thing, you know, and it will stick in the craw of any taxpayer to think that they could be compensating.
We had a really strong reaction to it yesterday.
Yeah, a vile man. Look, he's always said he was never part of the IRA. There have been, you know, which is important to say, but there have been so many politicians and so many journalists and investigative journalists who've uncovered very unsavoury aspects of this man's involvement with things that happened during the Troubles in Ireland. He's tried to rehabilitate himself as some sort of Irish Nelson Mandela. Right. I'm sorry, we're not buying any of it.
We're certainly not.
We know of his involvement, and there was no obligation on this government to repeal the law that actually stopped him getting these payments.
Right.
You know, the Supreme Court said that that he was unlawfully detained, and so the Conservative government passed a law which would prevent payments being made.
Right.
And simply because an Irish High Court said that this violated the Human Rights Act, they now feel compelled to do this. No, you don't have to go by an Irish High Court thing.
No.
And why is the Human Rights Act still standing? That's a piece of Labour legislation the Tories should have done away with long ago, along with the Equalities Act. Those two acts have caused so much harm to this country, and this is yet another example of how people like Jerry Adams are able to milk the system through this flawed piece of legislation, the Human Rights Act.
And it all seems to also go back, does it not, to the fact that there's a sort of political and legal nicety, very pedantic one, in which the order was given by somebody who wasn't the Secretary of State. It was given by a minister who was more junior to that. And, of course, there's also questions being asked this morning in some of the papers. The Mail's got a piece about Lord Hermer, who is now Starmer's Attorney General, because he, of course, represented Jerry Adams in a damages claim in 2023. And he was asked the question yesterday, are you making any money out of this?
Yes, and he refused to answer this. Because people need to know, was he retained on a no-win, no-fee basis?
Yes.
Because if he was, then he stands to benefit. If Jerry Adams gets a payment from this, then perhaps this, peer, and, we need to just, it's every lawyer's right to basically look after any client that they want. But the question is, was he involved in any way in advising the government on this issue? And is he actually going to benefit from this repeal of this law? And he basically has refused to answer this question.
Well, it's worse than that, right? Because here it is, you're probably too old to go back and remember the Guinness scandal, too young to remember the Guinness scandal back in the sort of 1990s, I think it was.
I remember.
But when you remember somebody claimed, I can't remember who it was, he claimed he had Alzheimer's disease and he couldn't answer any questions about what had happened. This guy, Lord Hermer, says he does not recall if he benefited financially from representing the former Sinn Féin leader just over a year ago. So just last year, he can't remember if he benefited. I mean, do these people think we're all idiots?
Yeah, but he said even if he does recall, he's not obliged to give that information.
It's like, I don't recall where I went on holiday last year. I just can't remember. And I don't remember if anybody gave me anything to go on holiday or loaned me any houses or gave me free cars or paid me any money at all. I just can't remember.
And you just know that if this had been the Tories in government saying this, you can just imagine the high horse on which Keir Starmer and the party would be over this, you know. Well, it just stinks once again, of the corruption that's endemic in both parties at the heart of them.
Yeah, absolutely right. Got this from Lorraine, who says, Mike and Rafe, I love you two together. Regarding two-tier Keir losing 3 top members, not surprising by any stretch, however. I'm amazed that these 3 women allow themselves to be named as Keir's friends. This is, of course, you know, the triple whammy of losing Sue Gray, who was supposed to be the Chief of Staff of Labour, very controversially appointed. Then, of course, we had Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, who was a convicted fraudster. And now we've got Tulip Siddiq, who has done absolutely nothing wrong at all, but happens to be under investigation by Bangladeshi corruption authorities.
It's like buses, you know. You wait for one and 3 come along together. But it gets even worse, of course, because now they've replaced Tulip Siddiqui with a new minister who's actually now seems to have been kowtowing to China and has got herself embroiled in all sorts of scandals in terms of trying to lobby the government not to regard China as a threat to this country, which, of course, we all know that it is.
This is a woman called Emma Reynolds, who has been installed in Tulip Siddiq's place as anti-corruption minister. She's previously been known to be a China lobbyist. Extraordinary, isn't it? Where do they find these people? I mean, do you think it wouldn't be difficult to find somebody who hasn't got links to another country, which might be considered to be perhaps not as well run democratically as ours?
Yeah,
Do you think they could find somebody like that?
I don't know about who does due diligence in the government any longer, but I mean, there are so many of these
I think it was Sue Gray, wasn't it? I mean, that's why they haven't fulfilled that position, but there we are. Coming up, we're going to talk about theft. We're going to talk about phone theft and the front page of The Sun as well, which has got a horrendous story about a drill rapper who is now being lauded by the BBC for his, you know, extraordinarily brave lyrics and interesting songs. But he's an ex-killer, former killer, murderer of a young man who he stabbed to death in 2008. We'll bring you that, plus more, after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham, 6:37. I just want to say Reeves and Rayner laughing at PMQs is disgusting, says Pat. What's funny about people freezing, starving, being homeless and not being able to afford to pay their bills? Labour disgusts me. And Alan in Merseyside says, thank God for Trump. He's forced a ceasefire in Gaza and he's also frightened Starmer to rethink the Chagos Islands. Let's hope he can sort out the Ukrainian war. Trump is a true leader. Just talking about the Chagos Islands, it looks as though that's been sort of pushed onto the back burner rather firmly today, doesn't it?
Yeah, thank heavens for that. You know, once again, this is the impact of Donald Trump.
Yes.
This would have gone through were it not for Trump. They were desperately trying to get the Chagos deal signed and sealed before he came to office. Now, of course, Mauritius has had a change of government, which put a spanner in the works. And, of course, it now seems as if, quite rightly, they're seeing sense because, of course, the Chagos Islands are fundamentally important to American and British security interests in the region. We're going to hand these things back over to Mauritius. We never owned them in the first place. We're going to pay them to take our house,
it's mad,
basically.
Isn't it? Ridiculous.
And China, of course, would then be able to exert undue influence, would be able to spy on our bases if we actually lease them. And there's a great question, of course, about nuclear weapons, because Mauritius is part of the nuclear-free zone. And if we gave them the islands, there's a great argument to be made that we maybe wouldn't be able to have our nuclear weapons there. Once again, this is, the government placing ideology, placing this sort of sixth form university type belief in post-colonial anti-imperial theory.
And paying attention to the International Criminal Court.
And at the same time damaging our relations with our most important ally, the United States of America.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. Completely mad. Let's get a voice note from Stephen.
Morning, Mike. Well, I'd like to apologise, first of all. I slept in, missed 8 minutes of your show, but it's my day off anyway. Look, why can't we have a leader like Trump, who frightens the hell out of people, quite frankly, is a businessman, okay? And when he says something, he's going to do it. And what we've got a donut, no idea, Kia, right? And all he does, he gets on a plane, buggers off, makes his excuses, because he's burying his head in sand. People don't like him. He knows he's despised by the nation. Nobody loves him. Everybody hates him.
He must hate that as well, because he hates the idea that everybody hates him. He's off to Ukraine today. He's gone off there to sign a landmark 100-year partnership. Well, nobody asked him to do that. I don't remember him putting it in the manifesto. I don't remember him saying in Parliament yesterday, oh, by the way, and it's not about operational matters. He could have said he was going to sign an agreement. He didn't have to say he was physically going there to do it. But nobody asked for this 100-year partnership. What does it mean? Does it mean we're going to give them money for the rest of time, that we're going to continue to supply them with arms? I don't know. But I'd like to know, and I think that's a fair question. Let's look at another part of the government, Rafe, and that was yesterday, a select committee hearing in which Ed Miliband was asked to appear. Ed Miliband, of course, the man who's currently being described by many people as Mad Ed Miliband, who's a net zero fanatic. Here's what he had to say about whether people agree with him.
I think there is, I said at the outset, I think there's broad consensus for this and support for this clean energy transition, because people, I think partly because people recognise the scale of the threat, but also people recognise the reality of our exposure to fossil fuels, and that's what all the polling says. We have to make this work financially for people. That is the absolute precondition of taking people with us.
Yeah, well, first of all, there isn't a broad consensus on net zero at all. And if you'd care to step outside the Westminster bubble and outside of, Millbank and Labour Party headquarters and out of, the net zero fanatical kind of, groups of foundations that fund him, he might find out that ordinary people could not care less about net zero, do not wish to be forced to drive an electric car, and certainly don't want to have their gas boiler replaced by a heat pump. And he admitted yesterday as well that actually heat pumps may never be cheaper than oil and gas.
Yeah, and what Mad Miliband will find also is that people might be open to the idea in the broader sense, but once they see the pounds and pence, the costs to them personally of this, suddenly they realise what a flawed policy this is. And as you say, he has now said heat pumps may never beat gas boilers on price. these things cost £10,000 to install, as opposed to a £3,000 gas boiler. But the running costs are still high, even though these things are supposed to be more efficient, and yet they still cost more to run on electricity than gas boilers do.
And our electricity is the most expensive electricity in the world, you know, by a factor of about 5 times more than it is in America, which is madness. Let's have a listen to what he had to say about blackouts.
If I'm frank with you, Chair, there's been quite a lot of nonsense talked about last week, and quite a lot of scaremongering, and I just do want to sort of deal with it directly. First of all, I want to quote the NESO. They said at no point were electricity supplies less than anticipated demand. So when people are scaremongering about, for example, blackouts, they're talking absolute nonsense. As the NESO said, there's a very helpful blog that the NESO put out yesterday, which I recommend people read. Secondly, on gas, on the issue of gas storage, National Gas said the overall picture across Great Britain's 8 main gas storage sites remains healthy. So, and I do think this goes to my point in the opening, which is we should be working together on these issues, and I think there are people who want to try and sort of use and mislead about events that happen for their own purposes, and I think it's completely irresponsible, frankly.
Yeah, that's just exactly what he's just done, which is to use and mislead information, because we know for a fact that the blackout was very, very close to happening last week because of the fact that there was not enough supply because of the cold weather, and there was not enough generation because of the cold weather. We were importing more gas than ever just to keep everything going, and the idea that he says that the gas infrastructure is fine because we've got enough storage, well, we haven't, because Tony Blair did away with the proper gas storage that we had under the North Sea.
Yeah, it was Gordon Brown who did that when he was in his the cabinet that Ed Miliband was serving in.
When he was Environment Secretary.
When he was Environment Secretary, that's when we began to erode our energy security through gas storage. Yeah. You know, and then you had Nick Clegg refusing to build more nuclear reactors, nuclear power stations. We have a serious issue in this country with energy security. Yeah. There's still North Sea oil we could be tapping into. There's shale gas we could be doing. There's so much we could be doing to make ourselves energy secure, particularly when the world is so volatile. Never has it been more important.
Of course.
We should have learnt the lesson after the Ukraine kerfuffle. And it's just, the mind boggles at how this man can deny the reality when we can all see it.
Absolutely right. And to accuse people of scaremongering just to prove a political point, I think is pretty disgraceful. Let's move on to a bit of crime, because this morning the Sun have got an exclusive investigation. A balaclava-clad rapper who looks a horrendous character. He's on the front pages of the paper wearing not very much on his top half, except for a balaclava and a pair of jeans. He boasts about killing in his songs. He's now a drill rapper. He's been promoted on the BBC. Radio 1 Extra seems to like him rather a lot, keeps playing his music. A Sun probe has discovered that 10, which is his musical name, is actually Jake Fari, who's 35 years old, recently released from a life sentence for the 2008 murder of gentle giant Jimmy Mizzen. And that was quite a famous case, wasn't it, at the time?
That's right, a terrible case of a poor boy who was in a bakery, completely innocent, and was murdered by this vile cretin, who then went to prison. And the mother of the murdered boy became a champion for trying to, increase awareness of these things, got an MBE for it, and she's obviously terribly hurt to find that the BBC, again, which her licence fee is going to fund, is bringing on her son's murderer, who is a very nasty guy, and his lyrics are all about sticking it to people, all referencing violence and blades. Sharpen up my blade, I've got to keep those necessary, keep it ready. I mean, it's awful words. On YouTube, they've said that they're going to launch an inquiry into this, but our dear old auntie, the Beeb, has said, oh, well, this is, editorial independence of the DJs on what they want to play. Yeah. I'm sorry, this radio station, BBC Extra, has got a long history of having vile music from this drill rap and this sort of...
because it's wonderfully diverse, no doubt.
Because it's youth culture. I'm sorry, youth culture is not necessarily something you should be celebrating. No. And they've had a number of drill rappers who've committed crimes appearing on there. I think there needs to be a proper investigation into this radio station.
There absolutely does. Swing around a blade when I promised Mum I'd never touch a knife again. Never understood a life till you took a life. Look in the mirror now, you look alive. Look in the mirror, can you look inside? Trying to to balance out the good with the crooked side. I mean, I'm trying not to do it in a rapper's voice, but I mean, it is ridiculous. He continually makes references to the murder that he committed of Jimmy Mizzen in his song lyrics. I mean, surely somebody at the BBC must have listened to that and thought, well, this is not really suitable for broadcast, is it? Yeah. And even if it wasn't about a particularly gruesome killing of somebody real, even if it was made-up lyrics, you would think, well, this is surely some kind of incitement to violence, isn't it?
And, yeah, and instead of that, you have the DJ there, Theo Johnson, who's the guy who's been playing his music, and he and his producer have been basically singing the praises of this man.
Yeah, ridiculous. No doubt they'll have him in for an interview. There's the front page there, you can see it. Coming up, we'll tell you some more bad crime stories from the papers this morning, including a tycoon who had £500,000 worth of goods taken from his house, all recorded on CCTV. The police did absolutely nothing about it, even though you could clearly see the villains and the robbers taking what they took. Incredible stuff. This is Talk.
corruption scandal, not of her making, but in the family. Her aunt was the leader of Bangladesh.
And there was definitely some connection to Tulip.
Even if it was the house she lived in.
There was that, yeah. I think she was involved in some way in a deal done with Russia back in 2013, done with Vladimir Putin to build a nuclear reactor in Bangladesh.
Yep.
And she was pictured with her aunt and Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:51. It's me and Rafe Heidelmann-Koo right here from the New Culture Forum. A friend of mine was at a pantomime in Birmingham yesterday, says Graham. A joke was made about Keir Starmer. The boos nearly lifted the roof. and this is in the heart of Labour territory. I mean, this is the thing. When you realise that Keir Starmer is now being ridiculed at every point and laughed at everywhere he goes and booed everywhere he goes, you really know that you're in trouble. No wonder he's off to Ukraine today. He might get a few cheers there, perhaps, for giving them a 100-year partnership and a load of money. Let's get a voice note from Daniel on the peace deal.
Hi, Mike. This is Daniel calling from Tel Aviv. A lot of mixed emotions over here. My friends don't know whether the family members that are held hostage will come back home alive or in body bags. And it's also important that the world pays attention to Palestinians jumping up and down in Gaza, the West Bank, even the West, claiming victory. These are the people that have been screaming that there is a genocide, and of course nobody suffering an actual genocide was ever in a position of negotiating the terms under which it ended. So, you know, people need to pay close attention and understand the level of lies, propaganda and misinformation they've been exposed to for the past 15 months.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. That's a message from Tel Aviv. I think everybody is sort of on tenterhooks, Rafe, and waiting to see how the ceasefire, if it does kick in on Sunday, does hold. If, in fact, Hamas hand over all the hostages and do so with a clean slate and say, look, and they don't come and say, oh, well, actually, well, some of them have gone to Islamic Jihad, we don't know where they are, or Palestinian Jihad. There's a Palestinian Solidarity Campaign protest coming up on Saturday in London. It'll be interesting to see how that manifests itself, because we've seen comments from last night when the ceasefire was announced. You know, there was nobody on the streets from the Palestinian flag-waving brigade saying, what a great thing, isn't this fantastic? Because they don't want peace, do they?
No.
They want the end of Israel.
That's precisely it. That's the real motivation here. You know, it's been the motivation from the very beginning. This isn't about politics. This is about ideology. There's a visceral hatred. And, you know, you're going to get people in Gaza who are celebrating because they you know, the bombing's going to stop and all the rest of it. But the do-gooders over here, they don't never really cared about the Palestinian people.
No.
This was always about Israel.
Yes.
You know, this is why you didn't see any of these people protesting when the Saudis were bombing Yemen.
No.
You didn't see any of this when you had...
the Uyghurs are getting
the Uyghurs, or when you had in Syria, the civilians being bombed. These people weren't protesting. They only protest when Israel's involved.
Yes.
This was never about the Palestinian people. People need to wake up to all of that. And just seeing that footage you just showed there of one of these Hamas guys walking through these tunnels, these huge tunnels, just brings back how much better life could have been there if all the money, the aid they were getting went to hospitals, went to improving people's lives, rather than spending millions or billions on these tunnels.
And all of the noise that they will make about, you know, the innocents who were killed by the IDF in Gaza. You know, every single death which has been suffered by the innocent people in Gaza is on Hamas. It has got nothing to do with anything other than their use of them as human shields, their use of them as hostages to fortune, and their complete and utter militarisation of a civilian city.
Absolutely right, yeah.
There's no question about that. And let's talk about phone theft in this city. I was a victim, says S in northwest London, of a phone snatching last month in Euston. A month on, the trauma still remains. We need more resources for our police force so this crime can be tackled properly instead of cases being closed on the day they are reported. Front page of the Times today, surge in mobile phone robberies driving soaring knife crime. And that's not just in London, that's across the country.
It's an epidemic, you know, 47% rise in violent robberies and phone thefts, you know, and a lot of this is being done with you know, knives being used to steal people's phones. Huge increase also has to be said in violent robberies in shops. And in London, it says here, quite shockingly, black people accounted for 49% of the 739 people stabbed, even though they're only 13% of the population.
Right.
And of the 700 people sentenced for carrying knives, 45% were black youth. There's a real issue here.
Right.
This has all happened under Sadiq Khan's watch.
Yes.
Nothing's been done about this.
Which, again, a bit like the grooming gangs, nobody wants to talk about the race of the people involved,
No one wants to talk about it. Whenever you try to do stop and search, people say, oh, you're racially profiling people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, when you just see the evidence, I just quoted you, there's a reason for that.
That's exactly right. And that's the point that people don't seem to understand, and particularly people on the left who want to sort of mollycoddle the rest of the country to pretend that what's actually happening before their very eyes isn't happening. and it makes no sense, and that's why we don't ever fix it. Another interesting one on page 5 of the Daily Mail, tech boss from a company called Bebo had a £500,000 raid on his home, has had a go at the police, basically, because he said they dropped his case, despite the fact that he's got CCTV inside his house. You can clearly see the robbers who are masked running around the house, stealing Rolex watches, stealing expensive items, putting them in bags, running out. You know, the police did absolutely nothing, as if they didn't have any evidence.
You know, this is just yet another... This is also depressing. We just talked about the broken NHS.
Yeah.
Now we've got the broken police. You know, this is just another case of broken Britain. You know, it took more than 12 hours for the police to show up after this massive raid where £500,000 of goods were stolen in a half-an-hour ransack on this. And then they were told, oh, well, the investigating detective, he's going on holiday for Christmas.
Yes.
We'll get back to it when he returns.
Oh, well, that's all right, then.
And then, when he returned, they heard nothing more. Only when they phoned were they told, oh, actually, we've closed the case.
Yeah.
Despite having all this evidence, despite having CCTV footage. You know, and people have to ask, you know, you send 6 people for someone who's tweeted something they shouldn't have tweeted.
Yeah.
And yet here you won't send a single person to investigate a case like this.
Where you've actually got something that you can look at to try and determine who these people are. Absolutely incredible. One final piece of good news for anybody who's been out there trying to find a parking spot. A motorist has won a court battle after being fined because it took him almost half an hour to pay a £1.20 parking fee on one of these parking apps. And I have absolute sympathy with these people because the great thing about parking apps is that they're very good and very convenient and very quick when they work, but they don't always work.
Well, this is such a nice story to end on because some sanity emerges here. It took the poor guy 24 minutes just to put his details in.
Yeah, right.
You know how complicated it is.
Of course.
Imagine if you're elderly, you're trying to sign up, put your email password in and all the rest of it.
Set up an account.
You know, and yet, despite that, despite the courts basically throwing it out of court, these parking companies still say that they won't change their policies.
I know.
It's
It is absolutely ridiculous. And again, the same goes for these electric car apps as well, because, you know, the charging apps, apparently, depending on which part of the country you're in, you have to sign up to something like 20 or 30 different apps in order to use the charging points, because they're all run by different companies. Absolutely, utterly ridiculous. This from Sharon in Staffordshire on the breaking news. Mike, why does Starmer not stay in the UK and sort out the mess he has caused here instead of jetting off to Ukraine to give them more taxpayers' money? Well, it's a very good question. Unfortunately, we can't put it to Keir Starmer because he never comes on this show to answer any questions. But yes, he's off to Kiev today to sign what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. Heaven help us.
I think historically, if you look at prime ministers who are in the doldrums, who are facing such a bleak situation, they love to go abroad where they can strut the stage and forget about all their troubles at home.
Perhaps he's hoping they'll name a street after him like they did after Boris Johnson. I mean,
Starmer Square.
Starmer Square, absolutely ridiculous.
Starmer dead end, I think.
We want your calls today on the NHS as well, because a big report has come out from the nursing union in which it basically says, the Royal College of Nursing, we are in peak disaster zone land when it comes to the NHS. Tony says this: in 1980 we had a population of 56 million and 350,000 hospital beds. Today we have a population of 70 million and 140,000 hospital beds. You do the maths. I think that probably tells you all you need to know. Tony, thank you very much indeed. Rafe, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Rafe Harleman-Kill will be back, I'm sure, very shortly. We'll be back after this with more from the papers and more on the ceasefire deal.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 2 minutes past 7. I am Mike Graham and we are here with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course, for a glorious hours of Morning Glory this morning. We await to an awful lot of headlines, which should be good news for anyone who wants peace in the Middle East. Ceasefire joy on both sides is what it says on the front page of the Times. Qatar and US broker a deal to end 15 months of war in Gaza. Hamas to release hostages in exchange for hundreds of prisoners. On the front page of the Daily Mail, a slightly different take on it. New hope for Britain, Emily, as Israel and Hamas agree a hostage deal. That's Emily Damari, who was shot during the October 7th attacks, who is believed to be still held hostage in Gaza beneath the streets. At the front page of The Guardian, hope of an end to dark chapter with Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Joy and fear is what they have on the front pages. They show a picture of celebrations in the central Gaza Strip after the news of the ceasefire emerged last night. The Times goes with a slightly more even-handed approach and shows people celebrating in Tel Aviv as well. The Guardian ought to be ashamed of themselves, quite frankly, but who would be surprised at that? Joe Biden, of course, trying to claim credit for what happened. Everybody really knows who is the real hero here, and it's obviously Donald Trump, because if it wasn't for Donald Trump, this ceasefire deal would not have been done. Everybody knows that. Let's have a listen to Joe Biden getting a bit confused yesterday.
More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop.
The innocent people of Gaza. Yes, OK. Later on, he confused Hamas and Hezbollah. Donald Trump, obviously, has actually allowed Joe Biden to have this announcement made on his behalf in his final days as president, because on Monday, there will be a new president of the United States of America, and it will be the 47th president, and it will be Mr. Donald J. Trump. Coming up, we'll explain to you why Sir Keir Starmer has decided to travel to Kiev today to sign what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. Nobody knows why, nobody knows what it's about, nobody knows whether he's actually got permission from the public and the electorate to even do it. Is he going to commit loads more arms? Is he going to commit loads more money? I think we should be told. Perhaps he will tell us later on today. Meanwhile, more breaking news. The UK economy grew by a massive 0.1% in November, following a contraction of 0.1% in October. I don't think that makes much difference one way or the other, does it? This is Morning Glory. Let us get it on. Coming up, we've got a whole host of stories to tell you. Ed Davey thinks we should rejoin the EU Customs Union. Police are failing ever more to catch burglars. There's a phone-stealing epidemic going on. Ed Miliband has been up talking about heat pumps and how everybody actually agrees with him that we should be heading headlong into a net zero nightmare, even though it's going to cost us an awful lot more money. And also, of course, we'll be talking about Meghan Markle. She's been back at the scene of those wildfires in California, still trying to bring joy to everybody. I'm afraid it's not working. Let's talk, though, now to Leah Collins, editor of the International Jerusalem Post, because the ceasefire is due to kick in properly on Sunday. There's an awful lot of tenuous hope that basically it will work, that the hostages will all be released, but there's still plenty of people who wonder whether it is all sounding a little bit too good to be true. Leah, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you too.
Thank you very much for joining us. What's the feeling where you are? What's the mood where you are? Obviously, a lot of people very, very joyous last night, but with some time to think about it, you know, is there a lot of crossed fingers?
I think, first of all, the focus here is more on the release of the hostages rather than the ceasefire. We've been through this before. Yes, we really need to know the details of who's coming home, who's still alive. It's absolutely unfathomable that Hamas hasn't even told us all these 15 months who's alive, who's dead. I mean, it's part of the psychological warfare.
Yeah.
So, yes, there's tension, and I don't think there's so much optimism in the sense of this is the end. I think we've been through this before, and if it's not carried out correctly, we'll be through this again.
Yes, because all through this this negotiation process, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has been very clear that we must never allow Hamas to have the opportunity to do again what they did on October the 7th, 2023.
Indeed, and I think the point needs to be made that this isn't just a matter of Hamas and Israel. This is a threat that's facing the entire West. If invaders came in and rampaged through communities in a sovereign state, burning, killing, pillaging, raping, and abducting, if that can happen in Israel, it can happen elsewhere in the West.
Yes. And in terms of the release of the hostages, it's always been fraught with difficulty, hasn't it? Because Hamas always demands the release of Palestinian prisoners, and apparently Netanyahu this morning has given a statement that he's objecting to part of the agreement which would give, or rather Hamas are objecting to part of the agreement which would give Israel the ability to veto the release of certain Palestinian prisoners.
Well, in effect, it feels a little bit like Hamas is getting a prize here. They came in, killed 1,200 people and abducted 250, and now they're going to be rewarded with the release of terrorists with blood on their hands, and they get to demand who is the people that gets released in return. And I don't think that this is going to be a good sign of the long term, because it's just going to encourage more hostage abductions.
Well, that's right. And, I mean, one of the Hamas leaders that was killed in recent months was one of those released some years earlier, wasn't he? And so, obviously, the Israelis are going to be a bit careful about who they release, because if what happened last time happens again, it means you're basically releasing somebody so that they can attack you.
Indeed, and it should be noted that he also had brain surgery while he was in an Israeli prison. He had growth removed.
Yeah.
So he was treated, his life was saved twice, really,
Right.
by the Israelis, and then he went on to mastermind this atrocity, a mega atrocity.
Yeah, absolutely right. And, I mean, so what is the number, as far as you believe it to be, of the hostages that you hope will be released, and how many of them do you know are actually still alive?
I don't have the exact figures. Obviously, I hope that all of them are released. It seems that there's 98 hostages. Maybe half of them are alive, but I don't have the exact figures on that. But I think it also needs the point of bringing people home for burial also can't be underestimated. We need the closure. The families need closure. It's just terrible to think of these people having been taken from their homes. I mean, these are ordinary people on a Saturday morning. You know, the Beavis baby, you know, one still in diapers, being dragged from his home, and so even the dead must come home. They must get a decent burial at home.
Yeah, absolutely right. Hamas have basically been completely denuded, by and large, though, in terms of their operational capability. There was still some military attacks coming in from Israel to Gaza last night. I mean, obviously, is there a fear that leading up to the deadline that there might be some sort of last gasp attacks, if you like, coming from Gaza?
For sure, that's a fear. And also, even in the past, we've seen after a ceasefire went into effect, a UN-sponsored ceasefire went into effect, that 2 soldiers were killed and abducted. Their bodies are still being held, and their bodies are actually part of this deal. So, and that was after a ceasefire went into effect. So, obviously, I mean, it's a terrorist organization. We're not going to trust them.
Right. And that is the trouble, isn't it? I mean, you can't trust them. I mean, and what role do you think Netanyahu would wish for example, the Trump administration to have in trying to keep the peace, if you like, and trying to, because Israel has often said that if they're going to allow the ceasefire to go ahead, there'll have to be some kind of proper buffer zone between Gaza and Israel.
That's an important point. I don't think it's just up to Trump. I think, again, it has to be an international effort. I think it's extraordinary that the Red Cross is now coming in to help with the transfer of the rescued or released hostages when it hasn't even visited them. 15 months, it hasn't visited the hostages. It hasn't gotten them medication and aid. It hasn't given us a list of who's alive and who's dead. They don't need to be a glorified taxi service. This is the International Red Cross.
Right.
They should be active up till now. And the same with the United Nations and the UNRWA facilities, the hospitals and the schools there that were being used as terror bases and had terror tunnels underneath them. The hospitals were being used openly as terror bases.
And these
are international bodies. These are international bodies. It's not a matter of Trump who will come in for 4 years. The world needs to make this switch.
Right. And have you been surprised, and have people in Israel been surprised at the way that many people in the West and many people in organisations like the Red Cross have kind of sided with the Palestinians here unilaterally? And it's been quite obvious. I mean, I'm talking about The Guardian here this morning. You know, they've got a picture of people celebrating in Tel Aviv, in Gaza on the front page, but nobody celebrating in Israel. And I know it's a small thing, but it just, to me, it sort of signals what the problem is in the West, where people would rather side with, you know, these ghastly terrorists than they would with a democratic state with an elected, Prime Minister.
I don't think people were surprised. I think people were surprised at the extent of it and the incredible wave of anti-Semitic attacks that we've seen, violent anti-Semitic attacks we've seen around the world, also on campuses and in neighborhoods, attacks on synagogues, attacks on individuals. I think the depth of that and the extent of that in places like Canada and Australia did come as a shock. I don't think people thought that would be happening. Unfortunately, we've seen in the past also that the Palestinians are very good at PR, and they have turned themselves into the victims, even when they've committed the massacre.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, we've got another protest on Saturday from the Palestinian Alliance, or whatever it's called here. Nobody knows whether they're going to be out celebrating or whether they're going to continue with their call for an end to Israel's existence. You know, it almost feels like it will never end, that kind of stuff.
It does need an international approach to end it. When you're saying a globalized intifada, when that's one of the slogans, think what that means.
Yeah.
That means bringing ISIS-type tactics to your countries and to your cities. And unfortunately, we see that it happens. And people haven't managed to understand that is connected, that there's a line that joins terrorism against Israel and terrorism elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, Leah, listen, let's hope it all works out well, and let's hope the hostages come back safe, as many of them as we can find. That's great. Brilliant to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Leah Collins there, editor of the International Jerusalem Post, and she makes a very good point. You know, it's not just about the Middle East, this is all about international terrorism. Think about all of the atrocities that have been committed by Muslim fundamentalist groups, Islamic fundamentalists in the West, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in Bali, whether it's in the United States of America, whether it's here, whether it's in France. You know, it all is being carried out by people who have sympathy with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian regimes and an anti-Israeli kind of precept. It's as simple as that. You might as well admit it, and it needs to stop. And hopefully Donald Trump will make it stop. Let's get a voice note from Brian on Prime Minister's questions.
Morning, Mike. Brian from Southend. Just a quickie on Prime Minister's question times. You know, since July, I often sort of listen in on Julia's show or yours on the following morning and get the highlights or, you know, clips of it. And to be honest, since July, I've yet to hear Starmer answer one question. You know, why can't he just answer a question without going round the houses and ending up with a load of waffle? You know, and as for Millipede, God dear me, you know, the man is obsessed with this net zero that is going to corrupt this country or bust this country. And people are going to suffer with it, with the heat loss and lighting going out, power cuts.
Yep, nut zero, I think we should start calling it, because Miliband, not only has he got these mad, crazy ideas that he's going to save the planet, he actually thinks everybody agrees with him. I mean, that's surely the definition of insanity. I mean, it's time for the men in the white coats for Miliband, isn't it? Make him turn up at the Department of the Environment and take him away in a van. Lock him up for his own good before he does himself any harm. That's what I would suggest. And just in case you're wondering whether there was any question answered yesterday by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, let's have a listen to what he said about Rachel Reeves.
At the budget, Labour were congratulating themselves for having the first female Chancellor, instead of ensuring the country had someone actually qualified to do the job. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims he has full confidence in the Chancellor, but the markets clearly do not. Yesterday, the Chancellor repeated her promise to have just one budget per year to provide businesses with certainty. The talk in the city is that she can't meet her fiscal rules and there will need to be an emergency budget. So does the Prime Minister stand by the Chancellor's commitment that there will be only one budget this year?
Prime Minister. She'll be pleased to know the Chancellor will be in place for many, many years to come. She'll outstrip them.
So he didn't answer the question, actually. The question was, will there be another budget in March? He didn't answer it. He doesn't answer questions. The man is a complete waste of space. He's gone off to Kiev today to sign what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. Whoop-de-doo. Isn't that wonderful news? What does it mean? Why is he doing it? Nobody's asked him to do it. Is he going to give them all money? We haven't got any money. There's a 22 billion black hole. Hasn't anybody told him? For heaven's sake. The UK economy, though, is on the rise. It grew by 0.1% in November, following a contraction of 0.1% in October. It's basically flatlining. Brilliant. Richard Tyson is going to join us in a minute. Tell us what he makes of it. This is Talk.
gave the Act great teeth, because if there's one thing that the University Council is worried about, it's not so much free speech in many cases, but certainly liability for damages is something they very much do worry about. So it certainly was something that was a major component of the new Act. Like I said, we haven't heard anything more than you have, and we'll wait to see what the government has to say to us. The devil will be in the detail.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:22. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. We just told you before the break the UK economy has grown by a massive 0.1% in November, following a contraction of a massive 0.1% in October. What does it all mean? And let's ask Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Richard, very good morning to you.
Well, it's morning, Mike, but in economic terms, frankly, it is grey and gloomy because these numbers continue to extol what I've been fearing, which is the economy, frankly, is going nowhere.
Yes,
in fact, that it's at best, it's in sort of the kicking stage of rigor mortis. And although this number looks like a little bit of growth, when you actually dig in, the ONS have been revising down their growth numbers for the previous 5 months, no less. So the truth is that the economy is smaller than it was 3 months previously, back in August 24, and smaller than it was back in May 24. So it is gently heading south on an overall basis. But when, of course, you apply it to us as individuals, all your viewers and listeners, then per person, we're getting a lot poorer than that. We are in a per-person recession. I have no doubt whatsoever.
Exactly, and food prices are about to go up by about another 4%, so the inflation figure doesn't really help you at 2.5. And in fact, I mean, I don't know whether you know whether this is something that they can do, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're fiddling the figures at the moment anyway to make them look better than they are.
Well, that's what I regret. That's what I think is going on with the previous month's revisions, because if you revise the previous months downwards, that makes the current numbers a little bit smaller. So that is if it's a negative number, and that is what I think is going on here.
Yeah.
And so look, there's no good news, and we've got a government, of course, that came in saying that they were going to elected on stability and growth. Well, we've had instability in the finance markets and the currency markets, and we've got no growth whatsoever. This economy is smaller than it was when the government took control back last summer. That is the reality.
Exactly. And meanwhile, Keir Starmer's off to Kiev. He's on his travels again today. I mean, he hasn't been home for more than a couple of weeks. He's getting itchy feet, no doubt. He's off to Kiev to sign what Downing Street's calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. Well, I don't know what that means. Does it mean we're going to give them money for 100 years? We're going to give them arms for 100 years? I don't remember being asked if that's what we wanted it to do.
It's completely meaningless. And I just find it extraordinary that he thinks that's an appropriate thing to do, to go overseas at a time when, frankly, everyone's getting poorer here. And he didn't mention that yesterday when he was in the chamber answering what I thought was some pretty lacklustre, mangled questions from the leader of the opposition, who's actually, when you're sitting there, she's actually getting worse in Prime Minister's question times. Her sort of statements are mangling about 4 or 5 different things into one, doesn't land any form of blow, let alone any form of punch on the Prime Minister, who's sort of semi-laughing at her. It's almost embarrassing, and there's complete silence on the Conservative benches behind the leader of the opposition as they get gloomier and gloomier about her weekly PMQ performances.
Well, that is the problem, because I've said it's about the question and about how, you know, kind of focused the question is to not let him escape. But he's always got an escape route, hasn't he?
He has, because you don't quite know exactly what she's sort of trying to focus on. I mean, she was mangling things to do with Chagos, to do with the size of the economy, to do with Rachel Reeves' qualifications. If you mangle that all in the same sort of couple of sentences, it's hopeless. And she really needs to listen to some decent advice. Otherwise, frankly, she's not going to make any progress whatsoever. So, but the simple reality is that this economy is gently heading south, and on a per-person basis, it is heading south quicker than that, and we can all feel it in our pockets. No one is feeling rich, and no one's feeling better off. And all we can see is money leaching overseas in every single possible direction.
It's absolutely disgraceful. Richard, I know you haven't got much time this morning, but I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform, thank you very much indeed. We've got David in Gloucestershire wants to talk about the state of play. David, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are we?
Very well indeed. What can I do for you, sir?
Well, Ed Miliband is absolutely convinced and has told the country we are all behind him over net zero and all this. Well, let's hold a referendum then.
Where does he get this idea that everybody's behind him? I haven't met anyone apart from a few sort of mad lefty kind of, people who are making money out of net zero who want it all to happen.
Well, exactly. We know the people that are making the real money. What's his name, Vince, isn't it?
Dale Vince, yeah. Do you know Dale Vince has challenged me, put out a thing that I found on Twitter yesterday. He's challenged me to go vegan for the rest of the month. And he claims he's going to put some money into a charity of my choice if I do it. I've declined the offer, but I've asked him to put the money into charity anyway because he's got so much of it.
Oh, well, you know he's Forest Green Rovers. And of course
do.
That's Stroud, and of course
what a great success they are.
Here.
Hey, what a great success.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think somebody should go over there and go and sit on his playing fields. That's what I reckon.
Well, you could do that. Or you could go around and watch one of the dreadfully dire football matches that they play and eat a cardboard sandwich. As the first vegan football club in Britain. Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, I mean, Miliband is a dangerous individual though, because not only is he deluding himself that this is a good idea, we've now discovered he's deluding himself into thinking that everyone thinks it's a good idea as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just mad.
He is mad. He's a lunatic. Well, he's going to destroy this country bit by bit, along with all his mates. I know. Shocking, isn't it? David in Gloucestershire, thank you very much indeed. One here from someone who doesn't give a name. Mike, the word for all of this stuff is due diligence. Had Labour done it properly on a number of their candidates and ministers, had the Tories and Reform done the same, had the BBC done it in this rapper, etc., it is unlikely that we would be in this position. And Dave from Ringwood says, morning, Mike, where is the common sense? When you have financial issues, you don't take out another direct debit like the Chagos Islands. You cut your outgoings and only spend on things you actually need. But I'm going to be interested in what we're spending money on when Sir Keir Stalin lands in Kiev in Ukraine. This 100-year partnership that he wants to form with the country of Ukraine, I don't know what it is. As Richard Ty said, he didn't mention it in Parliament yesterday, didn't mention it when he was answering Prime Minister's questions, didn't mention, I mean, obviously for operational reasons, the Prime Minister doesn't tell you where he's going tomorrow, because that's fair enough. But he could have said that in the upcoming weeks we will be talking to Ukraine about forming a landmark 100-year partnership, and perhaps put a bit of flesh on the bones and perhaps explain what a 100-year partnership with Ukraine looks like, and what it means, and what it's going to cost, and whether people want it. Doesn't that seem normal to you? Let's get a voice note from Dave.
Morning, Mike. Great show as always. Mike, I'd love to say to Keir Starmer, right, I look at this country as a home. Would you open your front door to a complete stranger and say, come in, we'll take you in, and we'll even pay you to stay in my house? No, you wouldn't. And this is what we're doing. We're letting complete unknowns into this country. We haven't got a clue where they are. We know they have ill intent towards us. I just want to have your take on it, because I'm fed up with it.
No, you're absolutely right. I've said many times, Dave, that the equivalent thing to do if you were talking about your home as opposed to the British borders is that not only would you be letting people into your house and answering the door when they knock on it, you'd basically have the door open. In fact, you take the door off altogether. There would be no door, so people could just walk in to your house and stay there and eat your food and, as you say, get paid and wander about outside smoking cigarettes maybe, doing whatever they wanted, committing the odd crime and then coming back to sleep at night. That's what's going on. That's my take on it, Dave, and it's an absolute disgrace. Dave in Bristol says, I know why Starmer is always clearing off abroad and not staying here to resolve our own country's problems. It is because he can't. He doesn't know how. He has no understanding of the realities facing our own people. He hasn't got the guts to face up to those who are carrying out negative, destructive actions, bringing the country to its knees, including his own zealous followers. I think that's right. And amongst those problems that Starmer has got back home is one man by the name of Lord Herner, KC. He happens to be the Attorney General of this country, right? Now, he's the guy who is looking around the possibility of giving compensation to Jerry Adams and various other members of terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland, people who were imprisoned for reasons that the security forces knew and for reasons that the security forces thought were entirely justified, right? However, there's been a furious rows erupted because the government has decided to table a law which would allow Jerry Adams and hundreds of other former suspected terrorists to lodge compensation claims against the UK government, which would mean, of course, that ordinary taxpayers like you and I would be basically subsidising Jerry Adams' life. if he was to win. Now, he got up in the Commons yesterday, Keir Starmer, because he realised it was a bit of a blunder to try and kind of ameliorate the problem, to try and say that, oh, it's not going to be that bad. It really isn't, because what we're going to do is we're going to do our level best to stop these kinds of compensation claims from being made. Well, wanting to do your level best is one thing. Setting up a law which allows somebody to make that claim is another. And Keir Starmer will not be able to hold back the tide, because if people get decent lawyers, they will, of course, probably be victorious when they seek to get compensation. And, of course, one of Gerry Adams' former lawyers is one Lord Hermer, KC, the Attorney General. That's right. He actually represented Gerry Adams in a case against the government last year, right? He represented him in a lawsuit which was brought against him by 3 victims of the provisional IRA. And, of course, he can't remember what happened. He was asked about it, and he refused to answer. He was asked about whether he made any money out of representing Gerry Adams. He can't remember whether he made any money. I mean, it was just over a year ago. It's like you asking me if I remembered making any money from doing a live show with Kevin O'Sullivan. I can't remember if we made any money. I just don't know. It slipped my mind. Maybe I'll ask Kevin. I mean, he's got no chance of remembering, for heaven's sake. But, you know, this is ridiculous. These people are hiding behind a convention in Whitehall that says you don't have to tell anything to anybody because it can all be secret. Well, we need to know, I'm afraid. If we're going to start paying out money to members of the IRA and associates of theirs, then I think the public in this country have a right to know why that is somehow happening. And the idea that Keir Starmer is somehow going to stop it happening is a joke. He can't stop anything happening. He can't stop the boats from landing on our shores. He can't stop the NHS waiting list from growing. He can't stop the farmers from demonstrating. He can't really stop anything from happening in his own country because he has no control. He can't even stop his own Labour MPs from voting against him about a grooming inquiry. So there's that. It's 7:33. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
7:36, welcome back to Morning and Glory. We are just a few days away, ladies and gentlemen, from a new presidential incumbent, one Donald J. Trump, who's going to be the 47th President of the United States of America. He's inaugurated on Monday. Famously, Keir Starmer has not been invited to the inauguration, as I pointed out on Twitter, much to the chagrin of lots of people who were screaming at the top of their lungs, but no British Prime Minister has ever been invited. Well, actually not quite true, because it turns out, as well as him not being invited, several leaders of the world countries, including Brazil, including Argentina, including Italy, including Japan, have been invited. We're supposed to be the ones with a special relationship. You don't hear Americans talking about the special relationship with Brazil or with Argentina or with Italy, do you? Or with Japan? No, I've never heard that. But we have a special relationship, supposedly. But Keir Starmer's ruined it. So he's not going. It's as simple as that. You're watching here, as you see it, the inauguration picture, the portrait, which has been released for Mr. Donald J. Trump. Let's talk to Marley Morris now, Associate Director for Trade, Migration and Communities at the IPPR, because it turns out that ministers have been urged, basically, by the Institute for Public Policy Research to show Donald Trump an olive branch and brace for tariffs. Very good morning to you, Marley.
Good morning, Mike.
Are you expecting tariffs to be forthcoming from the Trump administration? Because I'm not sure it's going to happen.
Well, there were tariffs last time round, particularly on steel and aluminium, and the president-elect has said that there could well be tariffs on all imports to the US of up to 10 or 20%, just as a kind of baseline starting point. So, I mean, we don't know for sure, and that could be something that Trump decides not to focus on. But certainly the risk of tariffs on the UK is quite significant, and I think that the government should be engaging closely with the new administration to try to avoid that, and even more so to try to actually negotiate a full free trade agreement with the US as well.
Right. But, I mean, how would they go about doing that? Because it's very clear that the Trump administration has got friends around the world in terms of the people that he's invited to the inauguration. He likes the leaders from Brazil. He likes the leaders from Argentina. Doesn't like China very much. He's threatening them with all sorts of tariffs on cars and car production and stuff like that. He doesn't like the Mexicans very much. He quite likes the Italians in terms of Giorgia Meloni. You know, he's got a few favourites, hasn't he?
Well, he obviously has personal relationships and kind of political allegiances. Obviously, there is, I think, quite a strong case, though, for a UK-US free trade agreement. I mean, the UK and the US have a long-standing trade relationship, significant amounts of imports and exports. I mean, the US exports a lot to the UK in machinery, in transport equipment. So there are clear benefits economically for both the US and the UK for a trade agreement. And of course, we know from last time round that that Trump was interested in a free trade agreement back then, post-Brexit. So I think it's reasonable for the UK government to signal that they're open to doing a deal this time as well.
Yeah, sure. And as far as the way that Britain's approach should be handled, I mean, you said that obviously the US is one part of the equation, but also so is the EU. Keir Starmer said the other day when he was announcing the AI sort of breakthrough that he said we're in a happy position here because we're not tied in with the EU. We're sort of sitting in an island all of our own, so we can make our own deals on all manner of things, whether it's AI, whether it's trade and whatever. So would you say that that was a good thing?
Well, I think it's definitely possible that we could do a deal with both the EU and the US. You could strengthen the relationship with the EU and also secure an FTA with the US. It's not impossible to do both those things at once. Now, there are certain areas where there are significant tensions, and I think the most obvious one is on food standards, because in the past the US has pushed for different food standards for the UK so that it can allow exports of chlorinated chicken and so on, as I think was discussed a lot around the Brexit debate. Now,
that all turned out to be a bit of a red herring, if you pardon the analogy, didn't it? The chlorinated chicken.
It's unclear whether I think the US does want to push the UK on these standards. So, but it's not necessarily a requirement of any free trade agreement. We don't know. It depends where the negotiations go. And we do know that the UK and the government's been clear that it wants a veterinary agreement with the EU. Now, a veterinary agreement is likely to require some level of harmonisation of standards between the UK and the EU. So, in that respect, there is a trade-off. Now, we've said pretty clearly we think that the UK needs to prioritise prioritise the relationship with the EU on this area because it's so important, and there's a real potential for us to boost our exports to the EU in this area. And of course, also, it's worth saying that the public are strongly supportive of the current food standards we have. So there isn't much appetite for lowering our food standards for a deal with the US. But we think it's still possible to negotiate something with the US. Just the UK needs to have clear red lines on issues like these.
Well, I wonder what the effect on food standards will be when all these farms start shutting down, when the inheritance tax rules come in.
I mean, I think that the farmers actually have been pretty clear, and NFU have been pretty clear that, you know, regardless of these domestic issues, they are committed to the high food standards in the UK, and you know they're a bit nervous actually about doing these deals because what they don't want is they don't want to see a reduction of food standards, and I think that's something the government needs to be clear about. You know, you can do these deals. You know, we have other free trade agreements without reducing our food standards, and so I think the UK needs to be clear about that. And again, that would, I think, help with our relationship with the EU, because I think if we were to lower our food standards to, you know, the US, then that would risk, I think, any progress on agri-food relationships with the EU. And we know at the moment that exporters are having a real hard time with it because we have all these different checks on goods that go from the UK to the EU because of the new relationship post-Brexit.
Yeah, sure. Let's have a look at what Joe Biden had to say in his final address. He started warning about a dangerous oligarchy.
That's why my farewell address tonight, I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. And this is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy.
And surely he's just described every president since the beginning of time, hasn't he?
Well, I think this is probably where you and I will differ, Mike. I mean, I presume he's referring to the kind of the social media companies, and in particular Elon Musk and so on. I think there is, you know, a concern here that the power of these tech companies is oversized and is dictating to some extent US policy, and in particular in the context of the report we have out today, dictating policy abroad as well. And I do think another important thing that the UK needs to be clear about in any free trade discussions is that we will maintain our own standards on online safety, because what we can't do is be pushed around and say we're going to lower our standards on online safety just because we're being expected to from the US administration and the tech companies over there. You know, we have our own sovereign standards which we need to protect.
Sure, but there's a difference between online safety and freedom of speech, and never the twain shall meet, and it seems to depend on which side of the political divide you're on as to whether or not censorship is a good thing, and whether or not you know, the sort of the attachment of political views to whatever is supposedly called fact-checking is worth doing. And of course, I mean, as far as American presidents are concerned, it's always been the concentration of a very small number of people who are incredibly powerful and very wealthy. You know as well as I do, if you know as much about American politics as I do, that money buys you power. And that's what's been happening in the Senate for years and years and years. You know, everybody asks the question, how did Joe Biden become a multi-millionaire when he's only been making, you know, a relatively small six-figure salary most of his career? The answer is, you know, pork barrel politics. People make money becoming politicians. No president has ever left the White House and not been a millionaire, having not necessarily been one when he went in.
Well, I think it's a fair point. I mean, the US has a long history of this. Although there are some, you know, kind of admirable exceptions, like you know, Jimmy Carter. I thought, you know, had quite a kind of impressive presidential.
Well, he
career.
did, but he was still a millionaire, though. He was still a very wealthy individual.
Yeah, and look, I mean, obviously there's a long history of...
He wasn't, you know, he wasn't the humble peanut farmer that everybody talks about.
In relation to democracy. But I think the concern here is specifically about these companies, and in particular in the context of the relationship between the UK and the US. What we can't have a situation is where the UK, you know, obviously we can have a debate in the UK about online safety versus freedom of speech. But what I think is unhealthy is if it's the US companies and the US administration that's dictating our own policy. Just as we had a debate about with Brexit, you know, we wanted to, you know, there was a debate and the argument became that the UK should leave the EU, and that was about our own sovereignty. Just as the same applies here, right? We have our own sovereignty, and if we decide to introduce laws like the Online Safety Act, then I think it's not right for us to be bullied into a different position or coerced into a different position just because of some overseas companies who have a different view on this. So I think we do need to maintain our position.
I don't see any sign of that happening, though, because, I mean, even Elon Musk, he's not even bullying Donald Trump. You know, when he started differing with him on immigration, for example, Trump stuck to his guns, Trump's people stuck to their guns, and Musk went away, which is what he does.
Absolutely, yeah, and it may be that this doesn't come up, and we don't know. This is at this point is speculation, but there have been some suggestions that this could be a condition of any free trade agreement. Of course, that would be unusual, and it's certainly not necessarily the case that this would be a part of any free trade discussions. Normally, you don't get these types of discussions in a free trade agreement. They would focus on areas such as reducing barriers in goods and services trade, and as I said, I think there's a real potential there for a UK-US deal. And the UK is a very stable partner of the US. The US hasn't done many free trade deals recently, and I think there is some appetite in Congress for a deal like this. And of course, we know the President formally talked about a trade deal with the UK. So there's a real potential here. I think the key is that the UK needs to maintain quite clear red lines on things like this, and engage openly and early on in the period of the administration, and hopefully a deal can be done.
Let's hope so. Very good to talk to you. Marley Morris, thank you very much indeed. Associate Director for Trade, Migration and Communities at the IPPR. Now, here's the thing. The Institute of Public Policy Research, you're wondering what that's about. Many of those kind of, what you might call fears about what Trump is going to do and what the American administration is going to look like, sounds like something that's been written in the page of The Guardian, doesn't it? Oh, there's that chlorinated chicken argument coming back again. Oh, what about Elon Musk? He's a bully. I mean, for heaven's sake, I think Keir Starmer doesn't have a clue what his trade deal is going to look like. And if he's going to send David Lammy over, he's got another think coming. Nobody knows what's going to go on. But Donald Trump has already made the world a safer place because, thanks to him, it looks like there's a peace deal in the Middle East. Let's get a voice note from Pete.
Pete from West London here. Just been watching this idiot Miliband on the television talking about net zero and that we were nowhere near having a blackout. Who on earth is advising this clown? I'm not being horrible, but I think perhaps we should have a few blackouts. Perhaps if people go without gas and electricity for a few days, and they'll see then what the reality of this net zero nonsense is all about. If they can see what it's really like, that might consign this net zero to the scrap heap once and for all.
No question at all. We're going to be showing you what Ed Miliband had to say before a select committee coming up next, because we're talking about net zero with Harry Wilkinson, Director of Policy at Net Zero Watch. This is Talk.
You know, the Chagos Islands that we're apparently giving away, along with 9 billion quid to Mauritius, despite the fact that it's a very important place and there's a strategic place there for our military and the Americans. Trump raging. He's been saying for months, doesn't he, with his stupid sidekick David Lammy, we're going to give away the Chagos Islands. Let's make friends of Mauritius. Let's give them 9 billion whilst screwing the pensioners. Today, old Mr. Turnip Round has decided I'm going to ditch attempts to get it done before Trump arrives, because Trump could get quite angry with me and then there might be tariffs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the home of common sense. It's 7:53. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. It's still looking a bit gloomy out there. It was a dreadful day yesterday. It was just sort of dank and wet and miserable, and the streets were all wet and damp, and it wasn't really very bright. The sun never really came out. I guess it is January, so we should expect that. But coming up, it's not as cold, hopefully, as it was last week. Let's talk about Net Zero Watch, though, because we've got Harry Wilkinson, the Director of Policy there, watching what on earth Ed Miliband is up to. Ed Miliband, Harry, very good morning to you, was at the Select Committee meeting yesterday, and unbelievably, he decided to say this about how he thinks everybody agrees with him.
I think there is, I said at the outset, I think there's broad consensus for this and support for this clean energy transition, because people, I think partly because people recognise the scale of the threat, but also people recognise the reality of our exposure to fossil fuels, and that's what all the polling says. We have to make this work financially for people. That is the absolute precondition of taking people with us.
Years. I'm not sure who he's been talking to, Harry, but I've not met anyone outside of the sort of rather cosseted world of green foundations and, you know, the swilling around of net zero money tanks that actually believes a word he says.
Well, this is quite classic behaviour from the climate alarmists. Whenever they're challenged, they sort of resort to saying that, you know, you're starting a culture war, or you're doing something that's totally inappropriate and totally beyond the pale, just by questioning these numbers behind net zero. Ed Miliband clearly doesn't want to look into the actual costs of net zero. He's just cancelled a really important piece of work that was commissioned by his predecessor, Claire Coutinho. This was a full systems analysis of the cost of his energy policy. So that means that his plan to actually have loads more offshore wind, would that actually bring down bills? That's the fundamental question here, because that's what he's planning to do. We have to know, will this actually work? Will this bring down bills, like Ed Miliband says? And a full systems cost would mean that, as well as the initial cost of building those wind turbines, you would also be able to look at the cost that they would have on the wider grid, because you have to back up that wind, you have to build the transmission networks, you have to build those power lines. So, you know, this was a really important piece of work that would have actually exposed, you know, the false economics of his policies. It would have exposed the fact that actually bills will rise because of his policies and not fall. So it's no surprise he's cancelled that, because he doesn't want people to see the truth that his policies are going to push up bills further.
Well, that's right. And he's obviously said the wrong things in the past. He basically made out before the election that we were going to save ourselves £300 on our bills pretty much immediately that they got in. He then had to walk away from that and said, well, it might be £300 over 5 years. And then he had to admit that it wouldn't be £300 at all. And in fact, there wouldn't be any saving, because it was all based on a model which actually wasn't going to come true. And now we've got electricity prices higher than anywhere else in the world.
That's right. That £300 came almost entirely from the fact that gas prices were falling off a peak from the energy crisis that we saw following the Ukraine war. So he was trying to take credit for something that had happened already. He's been exposed on that, and of course his policies aren't going to save people £300, and he squirmed away from that. But we really do need energy prices to come down. We have the most expensive electricity prices in the world. All our heavy industry is leaving, not much of it is left. This has been a disaster, and it's not been one that's actually helped us reduce our emissions, because if those heavy industries just move to countries like China, then we're not actually reducing our environmental footprint. We're just shifting where it happens. We're losing those important high-skilled jobs here in the UK and just shifting them abroad.
Exactly. And he also made a big point of how there were too many people scaremongering. The clip's a bit long, so we won't play it, but people scaremongering about blackouts and how close we came to blackouts last week, which is also a lie, because we did come very close to blackouts last week. And then he talks about how we've got plenty of gas in our storage tanks in Britain. Well, we haven't got plenty of gas storage for a start, so the fact that the gas storage we do have is full doesn't matter. And so he's being deliberately misleading, I think, about what it is that we are, in fact, in pursuit of.
That's right. Catherine Porter did an analysis which showed actually we did come very close, disturbingly close, to blackouts recently. But also we paid an enormous amount of money to avoid that situation. There are increasingly complex ways that we can avoid blackouts, but they cost an enormous amount of money. We have a huge array of actually more polluting backup diesel and gas generators, which can come on at a moment's notice, but we pay an enormous amount for the privilege. There is just no adequate alternative to having reliable sources of power at a grand scale, like large-scale sort of gas power stations, open cycle gas turbines, like nuclear power. These kind of technologies are absolutely essential. So, the fact that we've been breaking up our energy system, replacing it with all these very intermittent sources that can change their output, hour by hour, massive swings depending on the weather conditions. This is an increasingly difficult and expensive energy system to manage. And so we're increasing the risk all the time as our reliance on those intermittent sources increases. We could well see blackouts soon.
We could, indeed. We got to run. Harry, thanks for talking to us. This is Morning Glory. We'll be back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. Coming up to 3 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory every single weekday morning now from 6 a.m. Till 10. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be along shortly thereafter to take you through from 10 until 1. On the subject of GDP, so in October we were minus 0.1 and in November we are plus 0.1, so 0 over the 2 months then. Yeah, pretty much. The flatlining of the economy continues. Rachel Reeves continues to assure us that stability is what she's after and growth will be the result. But we don't see it. We don't see any way out of it, and we don't really see any way forward, I'm afraid. Lots of big stories this morning, of course, about the peace deal in Israel, between Israel and Palestine and Hamas, of course, who are due to hand over all of the hostages, they say, by Sunday, one day before Donald Trump becomes the 47th President of the United States. Coming up in this hour, we'll be speaking to Heidi Bakram, whose family members were murdered and taken hostage by Hamas on that terrible day on October the 7th, 2023. The other story, of course, that's going around this morning is about the NHS. Dead patients lying undiscovered for hours in A&E because NHS staff are too overstretched to notice. A severe shortage of beds means that the sick are also being left in animal-like conditions in hospital car parks, cupboards and toilets. Pregnant women are suffering miscarriages in corridors, and the elderly are languishing unaided in soiled bedding. It's a Royal College of Nursing report, 460 pages of absolute shame on what is supposed to be the jewel in the crown of Great Britain. The National Health Service is a disgrace, ladies and gentlemen. The shame and horror of NHS corridor care is just one headline that we'll be talking about coming up in this hour. Let's get a voice note from Jay on Donald Trump.
Morning, Mike. Fantastic show as always. I just want to point out the fact that about 4 days ago, Mr. Trump turned around and said, if the hostages are not returned by the time I'm back in, there'll be hell to pay for Hamas and the Middle East, OK? Isn't it funny that the hostages are now swiftly being returned?
Yes, it just goes to show you what a bit of power and a bit of influence and a threat will actually do to people like Hamas. And hopefully the peace deal works. Hopefully the hostages will all be released. Unfortunately, the Israelis don't even know how many of those hostages, thought to be around about 90-odd, are even still alive. We'll try and find out through the course of the show, of course. The other breaking news story this morning is that Keir Starmer's off to Kiev. He's going to see Volodymyr Zelensky to sign a pact that is apparently going to last for 100 years, a landmark 100-year partnership between Britain and Ukraine. I'm not sure anybody asked for that, I'm not sure anybody wants it, and I'm not sure whether it means we're going to be paying money out for a very, very long time into the future. We'll be asking those questions as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number. You can send us a voice note to WhatsApp on that number. Also, you can text us at 87222. You can tweet us at talkTV. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Welcome back to Morning Glory. You might remember waking up on the morning of October the 7th, 2023 and being as horrified as I was to watch the scenes unfold there. Since then, we've spent an awful lot of time talking to many different people in many different aspects of the story. Some families of people who were taken hostage, some families of people who were killed, some relatives of people who were actually there, some people who were actually there as well on that terrible, terrible day. And we've also spoken to many politicians, both in Israel and elsewhere. Let's talk now to Heidi Bakram, who has relatives involved in all of this. Her husband's cousin was kidnapped after his daughter was murdered by Hamas, and she hasn't heard anything official about his release up to now. Heidi, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Did you feel a sense of relief when this was announced yesterday? How do you feel about it?
I think we're all feeling a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Yeah. So we're living in this kind of duality of fear and hope.
Yes, because of course there are so many moving parts to anything like this. I mean, obviously we saw people celebrating in Tel Aviv yesterday. We also saw people celebrating in Gaza. But until, I suppose, the day comes when the hostages, if they are alive, still are able to walk out of the hell that they've been in and go back to see their loved ones, we won't really know, will we?
No, I mean, we've been here before a few times where deals have gotten, you know, we've heard lots of positive messaging coming out of different administrations, and then it's all gone haywire at the end. But this feels a lot closer to a final deal. So we feel more confident about this than we have about any other ones that have come before. But we're not dealing with a very stable situation, so any number of things could go wrong. And until we see those hostages in the cars on the way home, then we're not really relaxing at all.
No, of course. And when was the last time you heard anything at all about your husband's cousin?
So last January, they released one of the Hamas propaganda videos where they play games, psychological games, and he was in one of those videos along with 3 other hostages that were killed.
Right.
And Hamas said that he had been killed. So we haven't seen a body, we haven't seen any proof of life since then either, so we are going under the hopeful proviso that he is still alive, and we hope to see him soon.
I think most people listening to this will be absolutely astonished at how you even can get up every day and talk, really, because with that kind of uncertainty and not knowing anything for such a long time, it must be debilitating as hell.
I think the whole family is running so fast and fighting so hard that the darkness can't catch up. So his wife, Gali, has been a complete lioness this whole horrible period. And in fact, 2 days ago, she was on the Israeli television sending a message to Sahi and saying, we're strong, your family's strong, they're here, they're waiting for you, and whatever comes, we will heal and we will stay strong.
And are you in touch with anyone in the Israeli government or on that side of the conversation to find out when you might be able to get some news?
No, not at the moment. We haven't had any official confirmation from any IDF or government sources. So what we're seeing is a list that was leaked a little while ago, and it was the original list of humanitarian hostages from last July that the Israeli government submitted to that previous process. So Sahi is on that list. So we're going under the idea that he's on the list to come home. But I mean, all the hostages are humanitarian cases. They've been there for over a year. They're in terrible conditions. We know from some of the stories of the executed hostages a few months ago, including Hersh Goldberg Polin, that they were terribly treated. They were starved, half their body weight. So we know that they're all in terrible situations, and they all are humanitarian cases, so they all should be coming home.
Yeah. And do you think much of this is happening now because Donald Trump's coming into the White House on Monday?
I mean, I think that's had a massive influence on things, and it's focused minds. And I think, we've seen the outcome of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think there can't be any doubt about that. Heidi, thank you so much for talking to us, and we wish you well for the weekend, and hopefully some good news comes your way, one way or the other. What a terrible, terrible situation to have been in for all these months and years. October 23, 12 months until October 24, and then now another 3 to 4 months. So 16 months of horrendous uncertainty and just ghastliness. Can't imagine it. Peter Hitchens is here, columnist at the Mail on Sunday. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Difficult to think of anything else at the moment when you hear somebody talking about that scenario, really, isn't it?
It is, and to imagine the effect on a human being's life of having a close relative stolen by murderers, basically, and hidden away from you, and having no way of knowing whether you'll ever see them again, day after day after day. It is so cruel.
Yeah.
And it is the kind of thing which people think they can do because they're so good and so right, that it's so common in the modern world that people think their cause is so just that they will do terrible things of unbelievable injustice, and I have to say that counts in many other directions as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, we are in a very strange time at the moment. You know, we've got Keir Starmer off to Kiev today, where apparently he's going to forge a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine, which slightly worries me because I didn't know that we were going to do that, and I don't really know what it means.
No. I don't recall anybody saying they were going to do it, but it all fits in, I'm afraid, with the great delusion of grandeur which grips this country, its people and its government, that we're still a politically, diplomatically and militarily important country, and a rich one, which we're not. And the gross domestic product figures this morning show that we're not, and the flounderings of our faintly ridiculous chance to the exchequer show that we're not a rich country. So how is it that we can rush off to Ukraine and pledge them our full support when we haven't really got any money, and when our own armed forces don't work? Our ships can't put to sea, our army is tiny, and our Air Force is increasingly obsolete. We spend more money on housing benefit than we do on the Air Force. So quite why we are in a position to commit all this money and equipment to Ukraine, I'm not sure, nor, I have to say, am I sure in why it is in Britain's interests to do so. And I think that this really ought to be discussed. But our Parliament is so dead and so empty of dissenting voices that there has been no debate about the sense of this, and anybody who suggests that it might just possibly not be the wisest course of action is immediately denounced as a traitor and an operative of the Russian secret services. So it's very difficult to discuss it, but it is time we did. And when people see what it's costing, and also how little good it's doing to the people of Ukraine, who live increasingly in penury and darkness, then they might reconsider it. But no, it just goes on and on and on like a bulldozer.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? You think he might have mentioned it somewhere in his shenanigans or in the House of Commons this week.
You would, but then again, as I say, the level of debate in this country, both in the media and in Parliament, is so pathetic that he can practically say anything, and people say, "Oh yes, great, let's give our support to Ukraine," not apparently thinking about what this has done, the misery which Western policy has caused for the actual people of Ukraine. Is astounding. You say, and people will rightly say, well, the misery that Russian policy has caused towards the people of Ukraine is also appalling, and that is true. But that doesn't necessarily excuse a bad policy on our side.
No, quite. I want to ask you about Gerry Adams, whose name did arise in the Commons yesterday. You've told me many times, and I know from just your knowledge of you, that you've had plenty of run-ins. You used to describe Gerry Adams as having a very cold stare, and you spent quite a lot of time following him around, didn't you?
I did, yes, and there was one moment in private when we confronted each other, which was pretty fierce, but that was in private. In general, he at least attempted to be good-humoured about my pursuit of him. This is when he was first allowed entry to the United States back in the 1990s, about the time the United States decided pretty much to back provisional Sinn Féin against the British government, which they've done ever since. And I've said for so long that the so-called Good Friday Agreement, which I insist on giving its neutral name, the Belfast Agreement, was an act of surrender by the British government to the IRA. And people keep saying, what do you mean? It's obviously a British victory. I say, well, hang on a minute. Now you see that we're planning to pay compensation to Mr. Adams. Surely you can see this is the clearest sign of all that we lost.
It's a capitulation, surely.
What more do you need to understand that they beat us? And the main reason for this was what was so visible in Washington, D.C. in the early 1990s when I was there, was that the United States government decided that was going to be their policy. They didn't care about the supposed special relationship and their long-standing ally and so forth. They preferred to back Irish republicanism, and that's what they've done ever since. And here we are. There's a very funny cartoon in the Daily Telegraph this morning in my map showing people looking up a gigantic statue of Gerry Adams saying, well, I understand about the compensation, but I'm a bit surprised by the statue. It's worth getting out and looking at it.
I will have a look at that. Yeah, because it is, I mean, it's farcical, but also kind of sinister in its way as well. And the idea that Keir Starmer got up yesterday in Parliament because he was now worried about the backlash to say, we're going to do our level best to make sure it doesn't happen, while creating a law to make it happen.
Well, quite. And having a close colleague who's been involved in all this.
Yes, my Lord Hermer.
He's a very interesting member of the government. I think people should take a lot of notice of him. His appointment was very significant in letting us know what kind of government this is going to be. That is to say, a much more left-wing one than most people understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, so many things. For goodness sake, Martin McGuinness in white tie and tails at Windsor Castle.
Yeah.
Ought to have, one of my favourite lines in English literature is Jemima Puddleduck, who, as you may recall, was asked to dinner by a fox. And even required to provide some of the ingredients for the dinner. Right. There's a wonderful line, even the mention of sage and onion did not make us suspicious. There's no limit to the gullibility of people when they want to believe the opposite of the truth.
Yeah.
We have given in to these people, and Northern Ireland is on, as we clearly see, a slow ramp to reunification with the Republic of Ireland.
There's no question about that.
We've lost control of it.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think the time frame is?
We did many years ago. What do you think? While pretending it was called peace.
What do you think the time frame is for the United Ireland thing?
I have no idea. This has always been the difficulty. You can generally predict by looking at the elements of a crisis. You can generally predict which way it's going. But things, as the appalling Vladimir Lenin said, things could take years to happen. Or alternatively, many years can happen in a matter of weeks. Yeah. So it could suddenly come to a head at some point in the result of some change of government here or there, or some new development in the United States. I don't know. But the direction seems to me to have been absolutely clear ever since the 1998 agreement, and it continues in that direction. And over again, you look at the different treatment of ex-IRA killers, the man who blew up the Brighton Hotel, compared with the continued hounding of former British soldiers and Royal Ulster Constabulary people. It's plain, again, that the victors are all on the other side. And if this doesn't tell people what's going on, I honestly don't know what will.
Yeah, I know.
I hope he enjoys the money. or actually, what can I say? I mean, really and truly, it is the absolute pit of national humiliation when this kind of thing is going on.
It really is.
Recognize that's what it is, instead of constantly saying, oh well, yes, but we got peace and it's all right in Northern Ireland and everything's fine. No, we lost.
Yeah, exactly right. One quick point about Lucy Letby. You got a column in the Mail today about it. You're saying that there's a twist in the tale now, that even if she is innocent, looks like she's not coming out of prison.
Well, I think it's, judging by what's happened in previous cases, even where huge amounts of momentum have got behind various people who've turned out to have been wrongly convicted. It takes years, and the situation in the Criminal Case Review Commission, which just lost its leadership and was all before that in a considerable mess, is bad. I'm beginning to move towards the following formula, which is the longer the sentence which has been imposed upon somebody who's alleging a miscarriage of justice, the higher up the queue for review that case should be. I think that this case badly needs reviewing. I think David Davis's recent speech in the House of Commons, which everybody should read, indicates strongly that there are things very, very badly wrong with this case. It needs to be either retried or it needs to go to an appeal, which has so far been denied. Only the CCRC can make that happen. But at the moment, it's in a queue with actually scores of other cases and a huge backlog in an organisation which is understaffed and in my view, strongly underfunded, given the huge number of miscarriages of justice, acknowledged ones, which are now registered at a database at the University of Exeter. I think maybe since 1970 there have been 500 actual definite miscarriages of justice in the courts of this country, which is a shocking number. And the numbers grow because I think the quality of justice in our courts is declining quite fast.
Yeah.
And how can you decide what to give priority and what to, because all these things are urgent in their way. I would say if someone aged 35 has been told that she will die in prison, if there's any chance that she is not guilty, any serious chance that she's not guilty, and if measures can be taken to reopen that case, she should get priority.
Okay. Peter Hitchens, thank you very much indeed. That column in the Mail today, of course, go and find it and go and read it. Peter Hitchens back, of course, same time next week. Let's get a voice note from Sarah.
Just listening to you guys going through the latest news and headlines, I just despair. The Jerry Adams and his lawyer thing, I mean, and you can see it coming. He'll get a payout, which is disgusting. the BBC playing the music of that rapper, it's just despicable. I remember that murder, it was awful. And how he's even out of prison, I would question. And then you've got Ed Miliband gaslighting us with his NISO report, which we all know that he was involved in, and it's absolute nonsense. I absolutely despair. And if I had kids, I'd be telling them to leave, go, get out of here while you can. It's just awful, but I thank talkTV that we've at least got some common sense, and I feel that I'm not alone. Many thanks.
Sarah, you're definitely not alone. We are here right with you, and we will continue to be the home of common sense. But you're absolutely right. There are some things going on right now which are absolutely unforgivable. Keir Starmer is responsible for most of them. Ed Miliband certainly responsible for some of them. And it really is dreadful. But fear not, because we will continue to keep up the good fight. Coming up, Jack Elsom's going to join us, chief political correspondent from The Sun. We'll talk about Gerry Adams as well, coming up with Kenny Donaldson, director of the South East Fermanagh Foundation, a group of victims and survivors of terrorism in Northern Ireland, because it really is a disgraceful situation that Gerry Adams could possibly be in receipt of compensation paid for by British taxpayers. This is Talk.
Just very powerful to hear the reaction of those who suffered at the hands of the IRA and people they know who suffered at the hands to this outrage. And as I understand it, you know, what you explained earlier, Jeremy, that the government has now flip-flopped on this.
Of course they have.
Keir Starmer said, actually, after all, he won't be paying any money to Gerry Adams. No one will.
Only because not because he had the intelligence to understand the frustrations of people like Noel, but because he realises the public outcry again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:26. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through. A couple of pieces of breaking news for you this morning. The UK economy grew by 0.1% in November, following a contraction of 0.1% in October. So that basically equals at zero, I think you'll find. Also, Keir Starmer's off to Kiev today to sign what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. nobody knows why. He didn't mention it yesterday. He didn't say that he was forming a 100-year partnership with Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky. What does it mean? We're going to ask Jack Elsom about it, Chief Political Correspondent at The Sun. Jack, a very good morning to you. What's it all about, this 100-year partnership with Ukraine? Has anyone told you?
Morning, Mike. Good to be with you. Well, I think the details are going to be fleshed out when he is over there in Kyiv. But what this is Keir Starmer making his first trip as Prime Minister to meet President Zelensky in Ukraine. It is, as he describes it, a show of the unbreakable bond between the two countries that have really formed since Russia's invasion back in 2022. What we have now in this conflict really is, I think, a slow drumbeat towards a peace deal. Both sides are talking this up now, something that was unthinkable at the start of this war. And Keir Starmer, to his credit, has been very vocal in saying that he wants to put Ukraine in the best position possible. So when he does sit down with the Russians, the carve-up of land goes in Zelensky's favour. Now, obviously, people stress on both sides in Ukraine and in the West that this has to be done on Zelensky's terms. But if he is edging towards striking some sort of agreement with the Russians to bring this horrific war to an end, then he needs all of the Western allies in his corner. And so I think this is a show of strength to Vladimir Putin that, despite the fact that Zelensky might be willing to sit around the negotiating table, he still has the UK, the US, other Western allies backing him.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's move on to a big piece on page 10 in the Sun today. Leo McKinstry writing about compensation for Gerry Adams. Big story that broke yesterday morning. Telegraph splashed it. It came out of a think tank report, I think. Keir Starmer was forced to address it in the Commons as well, because the deal seems to be that the Labour government is changing the law as it currently exists because of what they regard as a badly framed law. But unfortunately, in reframing it, they're going to probably allow the possibility of compensation to be claimed by the likes of Gerry Adams and other people linked to terrorism in Northern Ireland.
Yes, totally. And I think when people saw this story yesterday, most right-minded people would have reacted in absolute disgust and disbelief for the reasons that Leo McKinstry today in The Sun lays out in pretty methodical detail. He says that Gerry Adams was, at best, an apologist for terrorism, and any penny of taxpayer money going to him would be nothing short of a national humiliation. Now, thank God that Downing Street seems to have discovered some political antennae, because Keir Starmer yesterday in the Commons said that he would make any possible avenue to stop this from happening. So that was a good sign. The problem is that it's all going to be now in the execution and the detail.
Right.
Because they couldn't give a guarantee yesterday that they would have legal options to be able to actually do this. They said they're going to look at every conceivable way, but that's still short of actually doing something.
Exactly.
And what you can imagine now is that there is going to be a collision between what the government wants and what the courts adjudicate. Now, the Tories seem to be up for this fight, and they were appealing against this High Court decision. Whether Keir Starmer wants to butt heads with the judiciary is another matter with this one. And you can bet your life on the fact that what it will do is open up more arguments about leaving the European Convention of Human Rights and repealing the Human Rights Act, because that underpins this ruling. Will Keir Starmer do that? Well, he's previously said in the past that that is not an option which would be acceptable to him. But, you know, if Gerry Adams does get this payout, then a lot of people are going to be very angry.
Well, that's the trouble, isn't it? Because, one, they're setting up the framework for this law to change so that compensation claims could be made. And then they're immediately going to try and stop people from making compensation claims. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And with lawyers being the way they are, particularly human rights lawyers, they're going to paint themselves into a bit of a corner, it seems to me, here.
Yes, definitely. And there's 400 cases, compensation cases, currently being lodged. And we know Keir Starmer is a former human rights lawyer himself. He's obviously beforehand said that he, obviously messaged respect for the rule of law, and you just can't imagine him wanting at all to go against the judiciary. And so that is why Labour decided to abandon the previous government's appeal against this decision. But like you said, in doing so, created a loophole in which former people who were held during the Troubles, like Gerry Adams, could be entitled for taxpayer cash. Keir Starmer now, what he needs to do is put his money where his mouth is, because talk is cheap. And in the Commons yesterday, he managed to get himself out of a hole by saying he would look at this. Now, right-minded voters are going to want him to actually act on it.
Yeah, exactly right. And the other big story, we're going to talk about it actually with a colleague of yours later on, is the front page of The Sun today, which is a great story, which is also made the leader column as well. Promotion of this ghastly wannabe gangster Jake Fari, who calls himself 10, by the BBC. He's the very same man who is in prison for life, supposedly, for the murder of Jimmy Mizzen in 2008. He's obviously now out of prison because life does not mean life in this country, sadly. And what on earth is the BBC thinking?
This is an absolutely breathtaking story, and one that really, really does make the skin crawl. We've today revealed in The Sun, put it across the front page, that the murderer of schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen in 2008 is now a drill rapper. Jake Fari glorifies violence. He didn't seem to show any remorse during the trial itself. He doesn't seem to show any remorse now. Anyone that looks at the lyrics themselves will see that he glorifies violence in a pretty disgusting and despicable way. And, you know, if that were the end of it, it would still be a pretty crushing insult to the victims' families. But it goes even one step further, because it's being promoted on the BBC. You know, the BBC are on pretty thin ice as it is over the past few years. I think that most right-minded people in this country would be absolutely shocked and appalled with this. The BBC put out a statement last night and said that they don't promote the glorification of violence whatsoever, but they are promoting someone who is not only a convicted murderer, but someone who is still pumping out pretty horrific lyrics in his songs. And so it's pretty simple now for the BBC. Will they apologise for that? Where did the vetting go wrong on putting this this criminal out on BBC Radio 1 Extra? Will they take this song down from BBC Sounds, and will they say they won't do it again? And so I think that people reading the story today, and I highly recommend they do, will be totally and utterly shocked at the lack of judgment and foresight by our national broadcaster. You know, this was a commercial station. It will be bad enough in itself, but the fact that we pay licence fee payer money to this, I think people would expect a higher standard from the BBC. It's an absolutely shocking story, and you can read all about it in The Sun today.
Absolutely right. Jack, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Jack Elson, Chief Political Correspondent at The Sun. On the subject of Gaza and the ceasefire, Mike says, morning, Mike, I wouldn't trust Hamas one bit. They told everyone that they want to wipe out Israel. Yeah, and they still do. And pretty much everyone who lives in Palestine wants to have the same outcome. Timothy says, great news in Israel and Gaza. Just goes to show what happens when there's a new sheriff in town. Trumpster 1, woke doom merchants 0. And on the subject of net zero, Michael says this, 100% agree with the guy that called in before. We should all boil our kettles at 9 p.m. and see what happens. See if there's a blackout. Well, I mean, you know, I don't be careful what you wish for, I think. I lived through the 1970s where we had blackouts every single day for about 3 months. It wasn't much fun, particularly in the winter, it has to be said. Let's get a voice note from John.
Morning, Mike. John here from Derbyshire. I run a private company, but I did a non-exec role in the NHS. And I have to tell you, the waste and bureaucracy and people doing non-medical jobs on six-figure salaries responsible to no one is rife. It's not made up. It's just unbelievable and doesn't happen in any other business.
Yeah, that's exactly what we hear so often, John, from other people like yourself who do work with the NHS and who are able to watch what it works like from the inside. And everyone that I speak to, apart from the most deranged lefty kind of union maniacs, says it just is absolutely riddled with inefficiency, riddled with overspending, riddled with wrong management ideas, bad management ideas, riddled with, as he says, people on six-figure salaries who don't do anything of any use whatsoever and certainly don't do anything medical. It's a shambles, complete shambles. It needs to be completely stripped bare and start again. It's the only way. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 8:38 is the time. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. Julie Hartley-Brewer along just after that. Remember a while back, Starmer said Ukraine would be at the heart of his government, says Jane. And one from Elaine from Bracknell says, Mike, Mr Harmer can't secure our own borders, let alone Ukraine. Absolutely right. I don't know what is going on. Plus, of course, yesterday he got himself into all kinds of trouble. Once again, another problem that he created for himself, because it's the government of Labour that has decided to reframe this particular piece of legislation, which might allow for Jerry Adams to claim compensation from the British government and thereby from British taxpayers. Let's talk now to Kenny Donaldson, Director of SEF, which is the South East Fermanagh Foundation, a group of victims and survivors which was formed to help innocent victims of terrorism in Northern Ireland. Kenny, I imagine when you heard this story yesterday, you could barely believe your ears, could you?
Good morning, Mike, and thank you for having us on this morning. Yes, indeed. Obviously, this particular story was captured in the airwaves a number of months ago, and then at that point appeared to be dealt with, but obviously with the repeal and replace of the Act, which the Labour government committed to, this is an issue which has now returned to the table. I suppose we're very clear in this, Mike, that there was cross-party consensus at that stage that certainly should Jerry Adams not receive this particular compensation, and we will be pressing the government very strongly to stand by that particular pledge, because if this were to happen, it would further debase our society.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. Let's have a quick look at what he said yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer, in the House of Commons.
Now it turns out his government may write a cheque to compensate Jerry Adams. Can the country afford 4 more years of his terrible judgments?
That act was unfit because, well, not least because it gave immunity to hundreds of terrorists and wasn't supported by victims in Northern Ireland, nor, I believe, by any of the political parties in Northern Ireland. The court found it unlawful. We will put in place this is a serious point, we will put in place a better framework. We're working on a draft remedial order and replacement legislation, and we will look at every conceivable way to prevent these types of cases claiming damages. And it's important I say that on the record.
The problem is, of course, Kenny, as I'm sure you're aware, is that they've created a different law, and they're now saying they're going to prevent people from accessing that law because of individual circumstances. And I mean, you probably know as well as I do that when you get human rights lawyers involved in things, they tend to find loopholes and ways of getting money.
That's right, and I think, Mike, look, this goes to the heart of our discussion in so many areas of our nation's life at the moment, that essentially Parliament is sovereign, and we argue very strongly as a group that where you have porous law which is able to be manipulated for the benefit of nefarious reasons, then it's up to Parliament to actually plug those gaps. And we have a circumstance where there is actually an ongoing case against Mr Adams in the civil courts in England, taken by 3 victims and survivors regarding his interconnectedness with the Provisional IRA over the course of the terrorist campaign. That is the allegation that will be put before him. So these issues are very live, and I think anyone in the context of these issues in Northern Ireland knew that Jerry Adams was the leader of Provisional Sinn Féin. Provisional Sinn Féin and the Provisional IRA are the 2 legs of what is the Provisional Republican movement. The 2 are interconnected and wedded.
Well, it's ridiculous to try and say that they're not, isn't it? But is that the same case that in which he was represented by Lord Hermer, who happens to now be the Attorney General?
No, it's a different case. This is a more recent initiative which has been led by three victims and survivors in GB, and they've been very courageous to take this case, trying to illustrate from the point of the Old Bailey right through to the early 90s what his leadership role would have been within the Provisional Republican movement over that period of time. Now, that is all to be led before the court. We have to obviously make that very clear.
Absolutely.
But Jerry Adams, in terms of his name and his brand in the context of Northern Ireland and beyond, is toxic with these issues. And what I would say is that Gerry Adams and others wax lyrical about their commitments to reconciliation, their commitments to wanting to move society forward. I would ask the question to he and to many others, what is this all about? Because is it about financial need? It absolutely is not. This is driving a further wedge between our community here, and people are feeling very, 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 very sore when they see this on the news last night.
Well, of course, the victims must feel terribly badly hard done by, because they're not included in any of this, are they?
No, and we also, like for your viewers across Great Britain, also as well as Northern Ireland, this is not limited to Northern Ireland, because often it is overlooked that there are over 130 innocents who were murdered across Great Britain in that very territory. But then if we take on board the regular army soldiers who were murdered in Northern Ireland while serving here, we're talking in the region of around about 550 to 600 people in addition. So it's a very significant tranche of people. And I suppose we would say to the people of Great Britain, don't consider this to simply be a Northern Ireland issue. This is a national issue. And this is about how does our state place itself in the world, and how is it understood? Are we seen to be a soft touch on these issues or not?
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with you, and I'm absolutely making that point to them, because not only does it affect people whose families had victims of the IRA here, but it's also going to be British taxpayers' money that goes to Gerry Adams if he's successful in a claim.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And 6 figures is what's being talked about. But to me, the financial element of it, there will be a high price to pay if this is settled, and it won't be in monetary terms. This is about political terms. This is about the equation of a campaign where people who were involved wearing balaclavas and other such armaments of terror wish to be placed on the same footing as those who were legitimate members of the security force of the state. This is this language of combatants. This is what we've been moving towards for a quarter of a century, and this weak government has appeased that until this stage. Successive governments, it has to be said.
Yeah, I know. We've moved the dial, haven't we? It's gone from, you know, oh, that's just your average terrorist, to, oh, well, that's just your English perspective on it. And actually, the other perspective is completely opposite to that. And we now want compensation. Shocking. Listen, we wish you well, Kenny. Thank you very much indeed. We'll keep in touch as well. Kenny Donaldson there, director of SEF, the South East Fermanagh Foundation, collecting victims who suffered under the yoke of terrorism in Northern Ireland and who are facing no claims for compensation whatsoever. They're not allowed to make them, but Gerry Adams can. And of course, would you trust Keir Starmer when he says we're going to do our very, very best to make sure that Gerry Adams doesn't get any compensation? Because I wouldn't, that's for sure. And let's get a voice note from Bernie on Ed Millipede.
Just a quick one on this quote that you've been playing by Ed Millipede. I think there's desperation in his voice because he realises he's not going to be able to persuade the public, and he knows that's the key thing to get this over the line. So I read that into his message. Anyway, this is Bernie here from Surrey. Hope you have a great day.
Bernie, very good point. I think you're right. He is panicking because he realises that they've found him out, right? He's been absolutely rumbled to be a complete shyster. You know, if he was in the Wild West, he'd be selling snake oil. This is going to save your life. This is going to save the world. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's only £15 a bottle. Joanna's in Glasgow. Joanna, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, sir.
What can I do for you, Joanna?
I just want to say, on Thursday morning, at approximately 5:27, having just made my tea, came back to my sofa, and there was a blackout.
Wow.
So lit a candle, then I realised my television, everything had gone off. Right. Realised, opened my laptop, which gave me light, put up my blinds, all the street lighting was out.
Wow.
So it's -11 last Thursday.
Righty.
So my flat soon went very cold.
Yeah, I bet.
So I thought, well, I don't know, I'll just wait. And latterly it came up, but we were nearly on breaking point, right?
Yes.
Well, we were on breaking point.
Yeah. And how long was the power off for? About an hour?
Oh, an hour.
An hour, OK. Any explanation? Did anybody send you a message? Or?
I've written to my local councillor, and who has... I say my... Well, I cannot believe what's happening to our country.
Yeah.
I just celebrated my 80th Christmas, and you're talking about the IRA and everything. I've been through the whole damn show.
Yeah, I bet.
And I cannot just believe. I mean, does Keir Starmer hate us?
Well, it does seem a bit like that, doesn't it? Joanna, listen, it's a great honour to talk to you, and thank you very much for making that call, but I've got to run because we're running slightly short of time. Does Keir Starmer hate us? There's a question for you. That's a very good question. I wonder if anyone can answer it. It's 8:49.
Didn't use any of his time in opposition to do any planning to give him any substance, and he's
4 years.
And he's continuing with just soundbite in government, and that's wrong. And we're going to see, as Jessica said, I think we're going to see the death of the United Kingdom with a lot of the policies that are coming in. We're going to see the UK break up under Labour.
But also just undermining everything that we stand for in this country. And I don't think he's one of those people that thinks what we stand for is diversity and human rights. No, that's not what built Britain, and it's not what Britain is about.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:53. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. We've been talking earlier on in the show about this remarkable front page on The Sun this morning. Exclusive Sun investigation. Rapper on BBC is Jimmy's killer. You might remember that terrible, terrible killing of a schoolboy, Jimmy Mizzen, back in 2008. He was only 16 years old. He was in South London in a bakery, minding his own business. This horrible, ghastly individual called Jake Fari came in and stabbed him to death. He has since been doing time in prison. He was supposed to have gone to prison for life, of course, but life doesn't mean life in this country. So he's out. And now he's a rapper. He's a drill rapper, to be precise, and the BBC keeps playing his music. Thomas Godfrey's here from The Sun to tell us what the latest is on it, because the Department of Justice, Thomas, I think has been informed as well. It's a great story, and thanks for joining us. Very good morning to you.
Yeah, the MOJ are looking into this pretty urgently this morning. It comes amidst some serious concerns from Jimmy's family over how someone with the criminal record, the attitude, clearly, of Jake Fari towards his crimes, the absolute lack of remorse that he has shown, not only through his trial, but clearly in the 15 years since, and obviously since getting out and taking to social media with some of this horrifically violent music. There's questions for a lot of people to answer today, not least, of course, the BBC.
Yeah, absolutely right, because One Extra keeps playing the song and some of the lyrics as well that he's using, because he's making sort of hay, is he not, about the killing itself. I mean, he says things like, never understood a life till you took a life, swing around a blade when I promised Mum I'd never touch a knife again. I mean, unbelievable. Stuck it on a man and watched him melt like Ben and Jerry's. He's actually profiting from his crimes, which is, technically speaking, not supposed to be allowed, is it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is straight up horrible in a way, and the BBC cannot credibly claim all innocence here. They played two of his tracks on Radio 1 Extra, described him as a standout. One of the hosts on Radio 1 Extra, Theo Johnson, credited his music, said he really liked what he was doing. Obviously, the fact the BBC have done absolutely no vetting here, clearly, of anyone who they are playing, and it's in this genre especially, we know that a couple of hundred criminal offences in the last few years have been linked to drill music. The Met Police have a team of around 40 people just studying the movements of some of these drill gangs. And we saw last week with the murder of Kellyan Bakassa, the 14-year-old known as Gripper online, how this sort of music, which perforates into every part, it seems now, of mainstream culture, not least through BBC radio stations, can end up with deadly and fatal consequences.
Absolutely right. And so, I mean, presumably the BBC, who haven't, as far as I know, yet issued any kind of statement, will have to take another view, because now that they know, thanks to The Sun, that this guy's a killer, surely they won't be playing his music anymore.
Well, that is a decision for the BBC. That is their crunch decision. Will they remove the episodes, or the one remaining episode that is available on BBC Sounds, which features his music, from BBC Sounds? That hasn't happened yet.
Right.
Jimmy's family, we think firmly of the opinion that should happen, of course, and pretty quickly as well. And Jimmy's mother, Margaret, was on BBC TV this morning criticising the BBC for not doing the background checks that they needed to do before they platformed and promoted someone who has turned out to be not just a bit part criminal, not a petty thug, but a convicted murderer. And at that, one of the most notorious convicted murderers this country has seen in the last 25 years.
And that's another question, isn't it, really, that he gets sent to prison for life, but he's now out and able to make a pretty decent living, thanks very much indeed, as some kind of rap star.
Well, he harboured rap ambitions before going to prison. He was known as Dirty on the streets before his sentence. He was, of course, 19 when he went to prison. Judges would have taken him into account his age, sentencing him. But 15 years for a murder so serious. And the attitude he showed throughout his trial, if you read it in The Sun today, Mike Sullivan, our crime editor, who covered the trial at the time, recounts in amazing detail how far he was flirting with the young female jurors. I mean, it's the sort of behaviour that just shows that he has absolutely no remorse, and clearly 15 years in prison has not changed him one bit.
No. It's a shocking story. Thomas, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Thomas Godfrey, reporter at The Sun, where the story on the front page today is quite extraordinary. An exclusive Sun investigation. A man by the name of Jake Fari, 35 years of age, sentenced to life at the age of 19, but now out and free to roam the streets, basically, after stabbing to death an innocent schoolboy by the name of Jimmy Mizzen back in 2008. He's recently been showcased on BBC Radio 1 Extra. He's been promoted by the BBC. He appears on a couple of their podcasts. He appears on BBC Sounds. He's described as, you know, a great up-and-coming star of the drill rap genre. And quite frankly, it's beggars belief. The BBC yet to make an announcement. As soon as they do, which I imagine will be pretty soon, we would like to hear exactly what they've got to say and exactly what they're going to do about not promoting it. Swing around a blade when I promised my mum I'd never touch a knife again, as he says. Never understood a life until you took a life. Head gone, chest gone, blades out, flesh gone. I wanted more, it made it less wrong. Seeing blood spilt on the same floor he was left on. I mean, just horrific. Ghastly stuff. Unbelievable. Another thorn in the side of the BBC, I'm afraid. Jill says this, morning, Mike, as much as I don't begrudge giving help to Ukraine, what about our borders? Where is the defence for them? Great informative show as always. Keep up the good fight. Jill from Berkshire. Delighted to do so, Jill. Coming up, more on Keir Starmer in Kiev. He's just put a tweet out. He's now there, signing up to what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. Well, what's it all about? Why is he doing it? And what does it mean? And how much is it going to cost, more importantly? We'll be back with loads more at Morning Glory after the news.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory in 2 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. We've got this from Lisa. So the BBC will play a murderous rapper's record but refuse to play a Christmas charity record because it took the Mickey out of Keith Stalin. Absolutely right. Keir Starmer, by the way, has gone off to Ukraine today because he wants to sign a 100-year landmark partnership with the country. Nobody's quite sure exactly what that means. Breaking news, though, from Israel as well. Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators and Israel in a last-minute blackmail attempt. He says Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all of the details of the agreement. Previously this morning, we were under the impression that on Sunday, all the hostages would be returned to Israel, whether dead or alive, and that deal now appears to be in a little bit of jeopardy, as Benjamin Netanyahu has just said that the vote will not take place this afternoon on the ceasefire deal until all of these details have been approved by Hamas, and everything is copacetic, as they would say. We'll bring you the latest news on that as we go forward. The UK economy grew by 0.1% in November. That's the other piece of news this morning, following a contraction of 0.1% in October. So basically flatlining. The economy isn't really going anywhere. We'll be talking coming up to Kevin Hollinrake, who's the Shadow Business Secretary, Conservative MP for Thirsk and Malton as well. We'll also continue our conversation about the drill rapper and the BBC. We'll also continue talking about Jerry Adams and the possibility that he could be claiming compensation for being locked up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We'll also talk a little bit about parking if we get a chance, because one particular individual has managed to actually win a victory against the parking authorities, the parking maniacs, the zealots. It took him more than 15-20 minutes to actually log on to an app to get his parking paid for, and they tried to fine him as a result. He managed to get away with it. Also, there's a massive increase in phone thefts up and down the country, not just in London now, up and down the country, and it's fueling knife crime as well. We'll talk about all of that. Plus, the NHS is completely broken. We've got a report from the Royal College of Nursing in which it says people are dying in corridors, people are being left dead underneath coats in hospitals up and down the country. A&Es are not just the only places where there's massive problems. The whole corridors and the care crisis in hospitals in Britain has now reached epic proportions. Something's going to need to be done. Is West Street incapable of doing it? That's the question. 5 minutes past 9. This is Morning Glory. Very good morning to you. Welcome to Talk. If you're just joining us, we've been here since 6 o'clock, 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory. Good morning, Mike. A word on this net zero nonsense, says Patrick. Why aren't we building hydrogen power stations? We're surrounded by water. Surely it could be used to produce hydrogen power. You may well be right. And Chris says, funny how these commies weren't worried about the billionaire social media tycoons when they were on their side. Now they're on the side of freedom. It's the end of democracy. Absolute charlatans, says Chris from Welsh Wales. Absolutely right. Couldn't agree with you more. Let's talk to Kevin Hollinrake, Shadow Business Secretary, Conservative MP for Thirsk and Malton. Kevin, I guess we should begin with the UK economy growing by a massive 0.1%. In November, which is not really making much difference since it contracted 0.1% in October. Some people have pointed out to me that that might even be due to people doing their shopping for Christmas. The economy is not in a good place, is it?
No, it isn't, which is, morning, Mike. It isn't, Mike, at all. Particularly disappointing when you see that the UK was the fastest growing economy in the G7 when Labour took over in July. It's now the slowest growing economy in the G7, and that's all because of a crisis made in Downing Street. The choices Labour has made at the budget and in terms of Angela Rayner's job-destroying employment rights bill, which will wrap businesses up in red tape. So all these things will mean businesses are less likely to invest, less likely to take people on, which will slow the economic growth down. In fact, take it backwards is what we've seen.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, how many more times can Rachel Reeves get away with standing up in the House of Commons and saying that, you know, we are building a stable economy, growth is our aim, and obviously people are going to feel the benefits in their pockets soon as we make them better off. I mean, they keep saying it like it's actually happening when it isn't.
Well, they somehow seem to believe that governments create growth in the economy. Of course, they do not. This private enterprise that creates growth in the economy. And all Rachel Reeves needs to do is go out and talk to businesses and see how they feel right now. If you look at every one of the key business groups, be it CBI, Institute of Directors or Chambers of Commerce, they're all saying all the needles were pointing to green in terms of investment in July. Today they're all pointing to red, because they're all worried about the future, and you cannot invest if suddenly you're clobbered with £25 billion a year of tax rises and a load of red tape in terms of your workplace, including giving trade unions unprecedented access to every single workplace in the UK, even if there are no trade union members there. It's all counterproductive in terms of growing the economy. They're making the wrong choices. They need to change course.
Well, indeed. And you think, rather than being in Ukraine today, Keir Starmer might be addressing the report which has just landed on everybody's desk from the Royal College of Nursing, 460-page dossier in which it describes how people are lying dead in A&E departments because NHS staff are too overstretched to notice. There's a severe shortage of beds, meaning the sick are also being left in animal-like conditions in hospital car parks, cupboards and toilets. Pregnant women are suffering miscarriages, the LD languishing unaided in soiled bedding. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace. And if anything, over the 6 months, and I know that, you know, we're not going to give you, as the Tories, any great credit for making the NHS work any better, but it's definitely got worse since July, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and of course this report is very worrying and we should be taken very, very seriously. We know year after year we see these massive demands on the NHS, particularly through the winter. I've got to say the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance from lots of pensioners won't help with that, and that was bound to have some impact upon those numbers of people arriving at A&E and other ways they enter hospitals. But no, there's no doubt there's huge demand on the health service. It needs to be more efficient, it needs to be more effective, it needs reform, it needs more money, and we've given it record funding. But this is not about the way we ran the NHS, because if it was, why would the Labour-run Welsh NHS be much worse in terms of its performance than the NHS England? The reality is, it is demand, of course, but it also needs more resources and critically reform.
Yes, indeed. Kevin, we're just going to ask you to hold on for a second there. There's a slight issue with your sound, which we're going to try and fix. We're going to take a call from Stephen, who's in the Lake District. In the meantime, wants to talk about the economy. Stephen, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good, sir. What can I do for you?
Just spoke to your colleague before. I'm a CEO. We have our 100 staff, about 130 in the summertime.
Yeah.
So this week we've just focused on basically how much this budget is going to cost us and what we need to do about it. So I've spent 4 or 5 days sat with my in-house accountant working out basically how much it will cost per employee more in taxes and salary based on the minimum wage increasing to £12.21. We've worked it out on a 45-hour week, which is pretty normal in hospitality, that the cost per employee will now cost us £2,850 per employee more a year.
Goodness me. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's insane. Absolutely insane. So I know we've had sort of, good news on the yesterday that the inflation went to 2.5%.
But it's not really, is it? I mean, to be honest, I'm not even sure I buy it. You know, I'm not even sure they're not fiddling the figures, to be honest.
No, I think the issue will be that when we hit April, I think we've worked out that prices will go up between 5 and 7.5% in our businesses.
Yeah.
So the cost of a pint, 40 to 50 pence.
Yeah.
At least from the 1st of April.
Yeah.
And that depends on what our suppliers increase their prices by once they've worked out how much it's going to cost to run their businesses. So I think people are going to be hit with insane inflation in 2025.
Yeah, this is right, because we've already seen a story, I think it was last week, saying that food inflation is actually running now at 4.5%. So this is why I don't believe the 2.5% figure for inflation, saying that it's come down from 2.6. I just don't buy it, because everybody knows every time you go to buy anything, it's gone up in price. You know, and it hasn't gone up by 2%, it's gone up by a lot more.
Yeah, it's going to be 5 to 10% in 2025, and if they increase taxes even more, it's going to be insane inflation, without a doubt.
I know. And is it going to mean, Stephen, that you have to lose people, or you have to curtail what you do in some way?
We're looking at every single option. Can we buy better? Can we decrease middle management costs? Can we increase our prices? Do we? What can we do? Do we charge our customers more for a service charge? Anything and everything we can do.
But you've also then got to worry about whether your demand for what you sell is going down because people haven't got the money.
Correct.
You know?
I mean, we are lucky because we're in the Lake District, so it tends to sort of ride out these difficult times a little bit better than most areas.
Okay.
However, it is extremely worrying, and we've been in business since 1947.
Wow.
And I've never been as concerned as I am now with what I'm seeing this government do to this country.
Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it? Really appreciate your call, Stephen. Thank you. Very interesting information. Stephen running a business there, which is going to be ending up having to pay, or for the privilege of employing people, over £2,000 per employee. The cost is going to rise because of the national insurance, because of the minimum wage. I mean, it's unsustainable for people running hospitality businesses, for people running all sorts of businesses which are, you know, shall we say, people-powered. You know, it's all very well if you've just got a load of computers and you've got a load of AI. You know, the thing that Keir Starmer thinks is going to make the world a better place. You know, the growth is all going to come because of AI. Well, what about all the people that are going to be unemployed as a result of that? Let's get a view from Del, who's in Brighton. Hello, Del.
Hello, Mike. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, good, sir. What can I do for you?
Yeah, very, very disappointed with the BBC this morning. You sort of hear the fact that they're playing songs by a murdering rapper.
Yeah.
You know, about knife crime and stabbing, and yet they banned a parody Christmas song about the old people, you know, who were freezing to death because of their winter fuel payments.
Yeah, well, they also banned what do you call it? Baby, It's Cold Outside, because they thought it was a bit too much about men controlling women. But it's all right to sing about murdering somebody.
No, yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to Keir Starmer, I call him Keir Starmer because we all know that Keir is the cartoon snake from the Jungle Book who tries to deceive everyone. He's a slippery reptile with hypnotic eyes.
That's true. So, he hasn't got the hypnotic eyes. That's the only bit he hasn't got.
So, no, BBC have got to sort themselves out. They are going down the wrong route here, buddy.
Absolutely
really
right.
Are.
Wait till you see what Keir Starmer's wearing. He's put a tweet out from Kiev. He looks as if he's come dressed as a member of New Order.
So he's actually Kiev as well now.
He is, yeah, he's in Kiev. Yeah, well, listen, he's been home for a couple of weeks, so, yeah, he's going to take a little trip abroad.
Absolutely, Mike, yeah.
But he's got the old Lord Ali shuffle going on, and he's wearing sort of what looked like a pair of Chelsea boots, some skinny jeans, a dark blue jacket, and a blue sort of turtleneck jumper. God knows.
Well, listen, Mike, keep up the good work, mate.
I will.
If it wasn't for you guys, we'd all have a silent voice, mate, honestly.
Listen, no problem, Del. You're very welcome, and thank you very much for taking part. Tony says, apparently Starmer wants to help Zelensky improve the economic situation in Ukraine. This is hilarious. Maybe Zelensky can lend the UK some money. And how about this from somebody who sent a message in a little bit earlier? If heat pumps may never be cheaper than a gas boiler, then why would we want one? Simple, says Alan in Merseyside. Well, that's a very good point. Why on earth, if even Ed Millipede says that you're not going to make a heat pump cheaper than a gas boiler, which is what he did say to the Parliamentary Select Committee just yesterday, then why on earth would you get one? Why on earth would you accept the fact that you're supposed to pay £5,000 for the privilege of having one? And why on earth would you then want to have one because the bills are actually going to get more expensive as well? Unbelievable. Should we have a voice note? Let's do it.
Good morning, Mike. This is Maddie from Essex. I think that two-faced Joe Biden should take a long, hard look at himself in the mirror before he starts talking about oligarchs getting into power while he was pardoning his own son. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, very well said, Maddie. Thank you very much indeed. Joe Biden, I mean, he's going to be gone in 3 days. Where are we? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah, that's it. 3 days left for Joe Biden. What can he mess up between now and then, for heaven's sake? A couple of bits of breaking news for you. Benjamin Netanyahu says that Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators in Israel in the last-minute blackmail attempt. So the peace deal is up in the air right now as we speak. It may well be fixed by this afternoon, which is when the Israeli government was due to vote on it. Another bit of breaking news for you. 2 teenage boys, aged 15 and 16, have been charged with the murder of 14-year-old Kellyanne Bokassa, who was stabbed on a bus in Woolwich, you might remember, in south-east London, on Tuesday of last week. We've got more stories about knife crime. We've got more stories about drill rappers as well going on. Front page of the Times today has got a story saying basically that there is more phone theft now, which is driving knife crime attacks all over the country. Knife crime has surged, driven by a 47% rise in violent robberies and phone thefts just on the streets of our cities and towns across the country. This is analysis by the Times of crime and sentencing data, which has exposed the scale of the problem in England and Wales in a decade to 2023. It's absolutely shocking when you see the statistics. We'll get stuck into those. We'll talk about those coming up in a little while. We'll also take more of your calls. 0344 499 1000. Oh my God, says Lisa in Birmingham. Two-tier Kia, never here, will be off to Davos next week, taking a few people with. Can you please get the travel checker sorted ASAP? We are trying to get the travel tracker, actually, is what we're trying to fix up. We've got the head of graphics involved, so we should get it by this time next week, if all goes well. 18 minutes past 9.
Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name. The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, Canada and the United States, that would really be something. All hell will break out in the Middle East, and it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 21 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham, of course. Got one here from Dave. He says, morning, Mike. If we just make every knife crime and violent disorder classed under domestic terrorism, it would drastically cut violent crime. I guess it would. I don't know. I mean, is the reason that there's so much violent crime the fact that some of the people who are taking part in it fear that they will not actually ever be caught, and if they are caught, nothing much is going to happen to them? Ridiculous, right? Bill from Romsey says, Mike, Starmer is off on his travels because he never got invited to Trump's bash next week. Yeah, well, probably. Yeah, he'll probably hit another few countries as well on his way back. You know what he's like. He likes to do a little bit of globe-trotting. But the way he's dressed is weird. I'm going to show you the picture in a minute. Let's get a voice note, though, from Jill.
Hi, Mike. Jill from Northampton here. Love waking up with you at 6 o'clock on my TV. I'm 68, heading for 69. Oh, my goodness. Still working full-time. I'm a waspy woman. I don't get my winter fuel allowance. What else can two-tier take from me to pay compensation to Jerry Adams? Let me think. Oh, I have a shirt on today. He can take the shirt off my back. Yes, okay. It's absolutely ridiculous. I am so incensed.
Jill, you're absolutely right to be incensed. It is ridiculous. You know, how dare he go flying around the world promising money right, left and centre to all manner of people, whether it's Jerry Adams or whether it's, the people of Ukraine, whether it's, the train drivers, whether it's the junior doctors, whether it's anybody that works in the civil service. Absolutely unbelievable. Andy from Notts says Keir Starmer will be drifting off again next week. It's the WEF at Davos on the 20th to the 24th. He will be expected to check in for further instruction from his handlers. Yeah, absolutely right. And one from Tony in Barrow-in-Furness. Mike, is Starmer going to sign us up to rebuilding Ukraine and Gaza while our pensioners freeze? Well, probably. You know, he's taking money away from people in this country and giving it to everybody else, or anyone else who happens to be lucky enough to work in the public sector. Let's have a look at how he's dressed. He's out in Ukraine right now, building a 100-year partnership, apparently. There's Vladimir Zelensky on the left, I think, who doesn't appear to be wearing his usual camouflage outfit. But Keir Starmer's wearing a sort of a round-neck jumper with no shirt underneath, by the looks of it, maybe a T-shirt. He's wearing sort of a dark jacket, the same colour. He's wearing what looks like skinny jeans and a pair of sort of Chelsea boots. He looks like either an assassin or some kind of former member of New Order, you know, on the Rebound tour, you know. I just don't understand. I mean, there's a couple of guys to his right wearing a shirt and tie. He's the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Can he not actually put a shirt and tie on? Sorry, mate, it doesn't work for me. Let's talk to Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer, who's always impeccably dressed. Ivan, a very good morning to you.
Hi there, Mike. I'm just going to put my lead in because I'm running out of power on my battery. Hold on.
Oh, are you? Oh, OK.
There we go. There we go.
There you go. See, look, you could actually manage to put on a decent jacket, a shirt and a tie. Our Prime Minister, apparently, it's not good enough for him. He's off to look like he's dressed as he's actually, you know what he looks like? One of those catalogue models that you see on the tube, you know. I don't know whether we're expecting this question, but, I mean, don't you think he should be looking a little bit more like you and I in terms of the way he dresses?
No, I wasn't expecting that question. I don't see the legal context of it, but...
There's a legal context for everything. He's a lawyer, for a start.
Dressing.
He wouldn't appear in court dressed like that, would he?
No, he wouldn't. He'd be in gown,
yeah,
and a wig in the High Courts. And
no, but he'd be wearing a tie and a shirt as well, wouldn't he?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I don't imagine, His Honour would be very impressed if he turned up wearing a turtleneck sweater and a jacket the same colour.
No, probably not. Probably not.
No. Anyway, here we are. We should talk about what we asked you to talk about, which, of course, is the immigration situation. We've got more kind of illegal migrants coming in. Once again, the boat's still carrying on. Nobody's really stopped them. Nobody really expected them to be stopped. But there's another story which says that migrants will have to prove they respect Western values, demonstrate honest living and pass a test in order to stay in the country that they wish to move to. This is a new rules that are coming out of Sweden, who say that they've had too much migration that they're not too keen on, and they're worried that, the people who are moving to their country are not properly assimilating. What do you make of it?
Well, it's just, I suppose it's trying to appease the right-wing part of the country, which tries to cause divisions between foreigners and locals.
Is it not common sense, though, to ask people, if you're going to go and live in a country, that at least you can do is assimilate with the people who already live there?
Indeed, and I'm all for that. We have something similar. We have what's called a Life in the UK test. And have you actually seen what the test looks like?
I don't think so.
Well, it asks the most ludicrous questions. I mean, I get that from my clients quite a lot. Some of the questions are quite ludicrous. It asks historical questions, which I frankly wouldn't be able to answer.
Right. Is this if you want to become a resident here when you get to that stage?
That's if you want to settle permanently.
Right.
And you need to pass that Life in the UK test.
Right.
There's also different standards of English language tests that one has to pass both as a migrant and then those who wish to settle. The only people who don't have to pass tests are people coming here as tourists.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about if you're coming here as a student? You don't have to pass any kind of test to study here, do you?
No, you do. So the university itself will have a minimum English language requirement. Oh, absolutely.
That surprises me.
No, the university have their own rules, and quite often they'll ask a student to do a vocational course prior to actually doing the full course.
Huh. And what about if you're coming here to work as a nurse or something?
Yes, again, you need to be able to speak English, because more importantly as a nurse, because they're dealing in medication and so forth. They need to understand and be able to speak, read, write English to quite a high degree. The level is called B1.
Right.
Which is quite a high level. It's equivalent to about A levels.
But we also know, don't we, Ivan, just sort of, anecdotally, that there are plenty of people living here who don't speak English, because I speak to an awful lot of doctors, for example, GPs, who tell me that they'll often have somebody come into their surgery who doesn't actually speak English, and that's why they sometimes have to bring their husband with them, because he does, and then he speaks for them. Similarly, we've got loads and loads of interpreters who work in the court system, who are dealing with foreign criminals that come here for whatever reason. Many of them may be settled, many of them maybe not. Same in hospitals. There's all sorts of interpreters. I mean, if everybody's speaking English and everybody's supposedly, doing this test, why do we need so many interpreters?
Well, I understand that. Look, some people are born here who don't speak English properly.
Well, that's bonkers, isn't it?
From all walks of life.
But how is that possible? Where do they go to school?
Well, it begs the question about schooling and education and whether they've been educated properly. I mean, I tell you what happens in court when someone can't speak English.
Yeah.
It's not taken well by the judge.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure the judge, in the balancing exercise, it counts against the person if they've been here for many years and they need an interpreter. Judges don't like it.
Right.
They like.
Yeah, but the bill for interpreters is massive. But the bill for interpreters is massive. So I mean, it's clearly it's an industry, isn't it? In fact.
I was in court yesterday in Birmingham, and we had a Nepali interpreter, and I'm not sure what the cost was, but it'd be quite a lot for that person to be in court.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, clearly, because there is a need for that, there are a lot of people who do not speak English, and that seems to me to be mad. And as you say, if there are people born here who don't speak English, that's even more mad.
Well, they can always make the appellant or the applicant pay for their interpreter.
Well, not if they haven't got any money.
Well, you say that, but, the application fee itself, I mean, it runs into a single person, say, coming here on a visa.
Yeah.
It could be up to about £5,000. So a couple of £100 on top is not going to make a lot of difference.
Right. What did you make of Keir Starmer's meeting this week with the Iraqi Prime Minister? Apparently they were going to talk about doing a deal to return people to Iraq. But
we need to do that.
You will know, but you will know better than me that there are plenty of reasons why some people won't be able to be returned to Iraq, because they'll be persecuted and we'll still be back where we were, like we were with the Jamaican rapist the other day, who can't be sent back to Jamaica because he's bisexual.
Well, look, we've got very strong laws on removing people. Let's be quite clear. The problem we have is the people we identify to remove, we can't remove them. Why? Because the receiving country won't have them. Or there's a risk to them being persecuted where they're going to. Look, nobody in their right mind wants to send anyone where there's a risk of harm to that individual and risk of death.
Well, I wouldn't say that, actually, entirely. There are plenty of people who would send dangerous individuals and criminals who have done their time in this country back to the country they came from, regardless of what happens to them when they get there, because they'd rather they weren't here.
Well, this is it, because deportation orders cannot be made by the Home Secretary if it contravenes the Refugee Convention,
but that's the problem, isn't it?
European Convention on Human Rights.
That's also the problem.
And trafficking laws. So any of those three bits of legislation, and also anyone under 18.
So those are all. So there's 4 impediments to deporting people.
Indeed. And so while we're members of this, I mean, if you're single and you've committed a serious crime, it's 99.99% you're going to get deported. No question asked.
Well, unless you say that you're gay or bisexual or Christian or something, right?
If it contravenes, if they claim asylum, but that having been said, it's not as simple as that, Mike, because the Home Secretary quite often will certify those claims as clearly unfounded. So don't think that everything's on the side of the appellant. It's simply not the case.
No.
So if somebody in the last minute says, I'm gay,
right,
I can't be deported, I will guarantee you it, the Secretary of State will certify that claim as clearly unfounded, and they will not be able to proceed.
Well, when was the last time that happened?
Many times. I've seen that happen many times when someone at the last minute, you can't simply, use that as a trump card. It counts.
But we hardly deport anybody at the moment, so it's not happening at the moment very often, is it?
No, we deport about 70% of foreign criminals. That's simply not true.
70% of foreign criminals? I don't believe that.
No, that's just those.
I think you're just making that up now, Ivan. I mean,
No, I'm not making it up.
You can't just turn up here and spout statistics at me that aren't true.
No, I haven't. I'm not making it up. No, the 30% not.
All right, what's the number then? If you say 70% of foreign criminals are deported, how many? What's the number?
That I can't tell you.
You can't?
I know the percentages, but I know the percentages because it's on the.
But are you sure it's not one of those, like dodgy statistics, which is actually 70% of foreign criminals who have been able to be deported, as opposed to the ones who've managed to stay here because they're gay, stroke, bisexual, stroke, Christian, stroke, whatever?
No, most of the people are not being deported because they're in relationships.
And they have a right to a family life.
And their right to family life, and or have children. And the court say it would be unjustifiably harsh to remove the whole family. Suppose someone's coming from Yemen, let's say, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to send a British child to live in Yemen, are you? And so...
Well, if you came from there, yeah. Actually, yeah. If you came from Yemen, you can go back, thanks.
The more serious the crime, I'm afraid the balance shifts in favour of the state. So if you commit serious crimes, it's going to be difficult for you to remain here.
I mean, somebody explained this to me the last time. I don't think I said it to you, but it was a border force call that we had from somebody who said, and these were perfectly legitimate reasons for people to come to this country, but there were three women. There was three women who were coming to work as nurses in this country, and I think they were coming from a country in Africa. I can't remember which one. And they basically had permission to come here. They had visas to come here, but they were also accompanied by their husbands, and they were also accompanied by about 15 children between them. And so as a result of that, there were sort of 21 people coming in to fill 3 jobs in the NHS. And you just think there's something wrong with that system, isn't there? I mean, I appreciate that some people will want to come with their families and all of that, but it's a kind of backwards system, isn't it?
Well, I think the free education is a big pull. So if you've got a large family, all your children...
Yeah, of course it's a big pull, but I mean, we can't afford it.
In the UK. No, indeed. And many countries make you pay for it. So take the UAE, for example, I just recently came back from, and I've been studying the immigration system in the UAE.
Yeah.
And you have to pay for your own education.
Right.
So if you have... or we could do like we do with child benefit. Then the first child is free. Anybody else you've got to pay for.
Right.
So
but what I'm saying is you can see the economic, madness of inviting 3 people to come and work in the NHS, hoping that they're going to help the NHS and hoping that they might pay a little bit of tax. But then they bring with them so many dependents that it ceases to become an economic benefit to Britain, and it becomes a massive economic drain. You know?
It does, and I also think that we need to train our own British nurses.
Yeah, totally.
That's the solution. It's not about making them pay for their education, whatever. The solution to all this is to have British jobs.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. I totally agree with you. If you go and live in Dubai, by the way, if you lose your job, you don't live in Dubai anymore unless you find another one. You know, you basically have no rights in Dubai unless you happen to be an Emirati. If you're a foreigner...
It's a bit more nuance than that. What they do is, because I've just come back from there, you pay a daily fine. So until you have 6 months to find a job, and if you don't find a job, you will pay a daily fine for not being employed.
Well, people I know who've worked there have been told they have to leave as soon as they've lost a job.
No, that's simply not true.
Well, it is true. Well, it is true. My daughter works there. She's been living there for 5 years. And she knows a lot of people who have lost their jobs and they've been sent out of the country straight away.
There is a grace period, and you can pay a daily fine during that grace period. So they don't remove you the next day.
Yeah, all right. Well, maybe they need a better lawyer. And put some business your way. You stop telling lies. We'll see how we do. It's 9:36. Ivan Sampson, thank you very much indeed. This is Morning Glory.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is...
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 9:39 is the time. How about this from Maria, who says, I've just sat both life in UK test and the language test as was applying for citizenship. The life in UK test is not hard. There were a few questions on history. Most are so silly that you have to be a complete idiot not to answer. One of the questions was, what do we celebrate on the 14th of February? Or, what should you do when you move to a new area? The language test, I went in, they've asked me how my day was, how I came to the interview, and if you don't know that much to say in English, then what in the hell are you doing here? One from David. Good morning, Mike. I lived in Portugal for 20 years and always had to pay for an interpreter for any legal paperwork. They never provided one for free. Keep up the good work. Interesting. Well, let's talk to Jake Wallace-Simons from the Jewish Chronicle. He's the editor, of course. Before we do that, though, let's have a look at Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's taking credit for, of course, this peace deal in the Middle East.
After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration.
Largely implemented by the incoming administration, which happens to be headed by one Donald J. Trump, the 47th President of the United States of America, who said last week if the hostages aren't released by the date he is inaugurated, which is Monday, they will be hell to pay. So I think we all know who's responsible for this. Jake, a very good morning to you. There seems to be a last-minute hitch slightly. Just before we spoke, Benjamin Netanyahu came out and accused Hamas of blackmail, says the Israeli cabinet would not meet to approve the ceasefire deal until Hamas agrees to all of the details which they previously supposedly were going to agree to. So does that put a bit of a cat amongst the pigeons here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not done until it's done, and if it's not done, then it will make Joe Biden's claiming credit for it look even more ridiculous. That clip that just played, I mean, he looked so petty. I mean, the main thing he was interested in was who gets the credit rather than the hostages.
Yeah, it was all about me, wasn't it? It wasn't about them.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about that is that he wanted to get this deal done in May, as he pointed out. Well, if it had been done in May, then we'd be in a very different position to the one we were in now. The IDF would not have taken Rafah. Sinwar would still be alive. Nasrallah would still be alive. Hezbollah would still be in full power. And the Ayatollah would still be riding high. He'd still have his air defences and all of his proxy militia around the region. And so there'd be no pressure on Hamas, really, to take the deal. The deal only was got over the line, really, by the IDF destroying Hezbollah, decimating Hamas, and humiliating Iran. And, of course, Assad went as well. That weakened Hamas so much. Didn't have a leg to stand on and were forced to come to the table more seriously. And of course, let's not forget Donald Trump vowing that there'd be hell to pay if they didn't do the deal by the time he comes to office. Now, these are the factors that brought Hamas to negotiate seriously, and it looks like come to the brink of signing this thing. It's not signed yet, though, and Biden looks totally irrelevant and pathetic, trying to claim the credit for something that he had nothing to do with actually getting over the line, and also isn't even done yet.
And even his team, you can't claim credit really either. I mean, Antony Blinken's been in and out of the Middle East for the best part of the last year and a half, but, you know, it wasn't clear what he was achieving. What has clearly happened here in the Middle East, and I'm very pleased that it has happened, is Israel has basically done the world's work for them by denuding Hamas, by getting rid of Hezbollah, by destabilising Syria to such an extent that Assad is gone, and by clipping the wings of Iran. So, you know, thanks very much to Israel, but no thanks really to Joe Biden.
Well, I mean, it's important to recognise as well that all of those achievements which I just listed, from destroying Hamas and Hezbollah to Iran and Assad, they were all achieved in spite of the Americans. I mean, the Americans tried to pressure the Israelis not to do any of that stuff. The only answer that they've had to all of the aggression and hostility over the past year and a bit is de-escalation. Remember, take the win. Remember, don't. All of those pieces of wisdom that have come from the White House have been trying to stop Israel from winning.
And that has been allied with more hostile rhetoric against Israel than we've seen against Hamas from the Biden administration, accusing them of going over the top and of disregarding Palestinian life. So he's been criticising Israel, demanding that they don't win, and now he's trying to take credit for the fact that they really have.
Right. And the same can be said for David Lammy, who was only there the other day, wasn't he, seeing Mohammed Abbas in the Palestinian Authority. He was sending very mixed signals, it seems to me. He went to Israel. I'm amazed anybody from Israel wanted to meet him, given that he'd said that if Prime Minister Netanyahu came to London, he'd have him arrested.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that David Lammy and the British government matters rather less to the Israeli administration than the Americans do. People don't really care very much what he says or thinks. But you're right. I mean, he's only come into office fairly recently, but has taken various measures that are hostile to Israel, including cancelling some arms export licenses to Israel, which
and
again,
that's still holding at the moment, isn't it? That cancellation.
It's still holding, but it's a tiny fraction of the arms that Israel gets. Right. It doesn't really make any difference to anybody apart from a bit of virtue signalling.
Right.
And also, of course, he allowed the case to go ahead against Netanyahu, which led to that arrest warrant, and has now said that he will abide by it. So these are not really the behaviour of an ally who wants Israel to win on our behalf. Don't forget, Israel, as you said, is fighting the enemies that would see us dead too.
Yeah, and also, and the final sort of nail in the coffin, I suppose, for all of this, is we've got another Palestinian protest coming up on Saturday. Would you expect them to be hailing the peace deal?
Well, look, I mean, if this ceasefire is agreed, as we hope it will be, it's difficult to know how they can justify any protest, because that's exactly what they've been calling for.
Right.
I mean, that is tarnished by this unseemly row where the Jewish community has been begging the police to stop these guys going past their synagogues. They've got 7 routes they can pursue in London for their marches. 2 of them go past synagogues. The police have finally said to these Palestinian activists, you can use the other 5, don't go past the synagogues. And they've vowed to resist.
Yeah.
They resist the police by all means necessary, they've said, because they want to go past those synagogues. Now, what could the reason for that be? Is that really out of humanitarian concern for the Palestinians? Is it really because they oppose all war everywhere and against genocide everywhere? Not that genocide's happening in Gaza, of course. No, the only reason why they could object to being routed away from synagogues is because they want to hassle the Jews there.
Of course, absolutely right. As somebody pointed out on X a little bit earlier today, and this was never about Gaza, it was always about the destruction of Israel at the end of the day. Jake Wallace-Simons, thank you very much indeed, editor of the Jewish Chronicle there. Let's get a quick voice note from Becky on Keir Starmer.
Morning, Mike. Becky from Worcestershire here. I've just seen on Twitter a picture of Starmer on his way to Kyiv. Please tell me it's not real. He's wearing a flipping T-shirt. Oh, for goodness sake, now he's trying to copy the Zelensky look. Give us a break, mate. Keep going. Don't bother to come back. Great show, Mike. Thanks.
Becky, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, we want to have another look at that picture. Have we got that picture that we can see of Keir Starmer in Kyiv today, working his way through the last vestiges of whatever money we've got? But don't you think he looks a bit like this? It's New Order. There you go. I told you. He's a member of New Order. It works well. Thank you very much indeed. We'll have to do that again as a tweet, I think. It's 9:47. Coming up, we're going to speak to Ahal Bezarai, whose family were kidnapped by Hamas. We'll talk to him about his hopes for this weekend.
sleepy Joe Biden proved to everyone that he has what it takes to be president. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Kamala Harris, L-Y-I-N apostrophe. Take a look at what happened. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 9:50. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here in about 7 minutes' time to tell us what's coming up on her show after 10 o'clock. Let's get a quick voice note from Nikki.
Hello, Mike. I live out in Italy for part of the year. I work out there, and my friend lives and works out in Spain for part of the year. And there's a big English contingent out there, and they make absolutely no effort to learn the language of their host countries or the customs or anything. They spend most of the time being drunk and shouting English words and putting vowels on the end of them. Yeah, English people that live abroad ought to learn the language of their host countries, don't you think?
I think they should, yeah. Sounds like a dreadful crowd of people. I mean, I know plenty of people that have moved to France who all speak French. Plenty of people who moved to Spain who all speak Spanish as well. I guess it depends who you know. Let's speak to Ahal Bezorai, whose family were kidnapped by Hamas. Ahal is a British Israeli. His sister, Yonat, who was thought to have been kidnapped, since been identified as being killed. Her husband and two of their children, Alma, who was 13, and Noam, who was 17, were all kidnapped from a kibbutz by Hamas on October the 7th. Ahal, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. There's a little bit of a wrinkle in the story today at the moment because Benjamin Netanyahu says that Hamas are, playing games and threatening blackmail and trying to disrupt the peace process that's been agreed. But assuming that everything is agreed, hopefully it will be by Sunday. What are your hopes?
First, regarding your first comment, I think it's expected that the sadist and vicious organization, terrorist organizations like Hamas would do something like this. So I think this is something that definitely was on the cards and, that we were anticipating. What are my hopes is that all the 98 hostages that are still alive and dead will be released. This is really my hope. I know it's a staged sort of agreement, and I can just be hopeful. I'm scared to be hopeful, but I'm trying to be hopeful.
It must be really difficult for you. I mean, do you hope, and is there a chance you think that Yonat's husband and their children are still alive?
Yeah, so the children actually came back in the first round of exchange. Okay. So they were 54 days in captivity, but they are back in Israel because they were under 18.
Yeah.
Yes. And what we found out, so what transpired 6 months ago, that he was actually also murdered, and it's his body that is held by Hamas and is not alive anymore. And this was really a devastating news for all of us, but maybe in particular to the children who are now off.
Right. That's just terrible, isn't it? And they can have no real justification, can they, for holding on to the bodies of these hostages who have died?
For me, they have no justification to anything, to be honest.
Of course.
So this is the big problem here. So for me, before October 7th, vis-a-vis the terrorist organization called Hamas or Jihad, there was an assumption that you are innocent before proven guilty. I think this now turned itself around, and I think now they are presumed to be guilty until they have it in them to prove that they are innocent.
Yeah.
And they can prove that they are innocent by denouncing violence, by changing the education system to stop brainwashing children to kill Jews, and to come and attack Israel, by denouncing what they did on October 7th, and not saying that if they had an opportunity, they'll do it again.
Yes. And that is the worry, isn't it? Because obviously that's what Benjamin Netanyahu has said, that he doesn't want to offer a ceasefire until the possibility that they could do that again is eradicated.
Yeah. So the possibility to eradicate it is really to eradicate them.
Yeah.
This is the sad truth here, you know. So the only way to eradicate the possibility is either to eradicate them completely or to eradicate them so hard that they just change their minds about doing it again. But because they're fundamentalists and they are sort of, it's ingrained in their belief and their viewpoint of the world, that it's very, very difficult to eradicate their need to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews.
No, exactly right, because unfortunately they are murdering bloodthirsty, ghastly terrorists, and I don't know how you change somebody who is that person. I mean, it's not like they can walk through a door and suddenly become a regular individual.
Exactly. I would not have found a better combination of words to describe them.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely right. And because of this, you know, you have to eradicate it. It's like a cancer. And when you deal with cancer, obviously some live cells are being affected. But these live cells can never blame the doctor that applies the chemotherapy, but the cancer itself. And the cancer itself here is obviously Hamas.
Yeah, obviously. Ahel, we wish you all the best, and hopefully the weekend works out as we hope that it should, and as we aim that it should. Ahel Bezorai, his family were kidnapped by Hamas. The children were let go, but the adults were killed. Now, we've been talking about Keir Starmer. He's over in Kiev at the moment, doing some kind of 100-year deal with Volodymyr Zelensky. We've been looking at what he's wearing. Can't tell if it's a turtleneck or a T-shirt, but he looks, as we said earlier, very much like somebody from New Order. Sally in Devon says, great show, Mike, as always. Is Starmer going through some kind of midlife crisis? Thinks he's some kind of mannequin? Well, you do wonder, don't you? We pulled a picture of New Order out to have a look, and he looks exactly like one of them. He could be in the band. One from Dave in Loughton says, Mike, it's not New Order, it's New World Order. And one from John in Norwich, who goes, he's got a picture of the milk tray man, all because the lady loves milk tray. I mean, it could be. Barry says from Morecambe, it looks like Starmer watched Men in Black last night. And Darren in Exeter, these are good, by the way. I don't know about New Order, more like No Border. Yeah. And then one from Brian, who says, Mike, I highly doubt that sending Starmer dressed as a NAF Spandau Ballet tribute act is going to entertain the troops in Ukraine. I've just been looking at the old New Order best of compilation. They've got a song called Regret. They've got another song called Shell Shock. And my favourite one is Thieves Like Us, which I think you could probably adhere to as well. But there we are. Julie Hartley-Brewers here. Very good morning.
Good morning to you.
Nice to see you. Keir, what do you make of Keir Starmer's outfit? What's he dressed as? He looks like a member of New Order.
Do you know what I love is this? You just know that there's so much thought will have gone into it.
I know.
I can't wear a shirt and a tie.
No, because he's in a war zone.
Casual, but
except there are two people.
Camouflage.
But there are two people to his right who are wearing proper, shirt and tie, suit,
It shouldn't be, it doesn't matter. What amazes me is that he's been Prime Minister 6 months. He's visited every other godforsaken country in the world. But what? Not Ukraine? Not our ally Ukraine you were trying to support in the war.
Well, hang on.
How did he not manage to go to Ukraine
Well,
before?
he went there just before he was Prime Minister, I think, didn't he?
Still, he wasn't Prime Minister.
But now he's signing a deal for 100 years. I mean, meaning how much does that cost?